Something impossible just happened. October 24, 2025. The night was supposed to be routine. Meerkat, the vast radio telescope array in the Karoo Desert of South Africa, was scanning a patch of sky it had combed 100 times before. No new comets, no anomalies, just the usual cosmic hiss, until it wasn't. At 3:17 UTC, a faint repeating tone rose out of the hydrogen fog, a clean line at 1,665 megahertz, then another at 1,667. Two narrow peaks, perfectly aligned with the spectral fingerprints of hydroxyl radicals, what's left when sunlight tears water apart. That shouldn't be possible, not from there, not from 3I, Atlas. For months, the object had been little more than a mathematical curiosity, a hyperbolic visitor cutting through the solar system faster than any spacecraft we'd ever built. Its orbit is interstellar. Its silence was natural, but that night, it whispered, scientists froze mid-calculation. Hydrogen line interference was common, yes, but not that frequency, not that purity, not from an object escaping the sun at 61 kilometers per second. Someone rechecked the coordinates. Someone else muted the array, suspecting crosstalk from a satellite. But the pattern held. A soft pulse. Then stillness. Then nothing. It lasted 43 seconds. The data log would later call it hydroxyl anomaly, the 24th of October 2025. But those who were awake when it happened gave it a simpler name, the Whisper. When the signal reached the calibration team in Johannesburg, half the room thought it was a software glitch. The other half went silent. They knew exactly where the line came from. Right ascension 19 hours 22 minutes, declination 26 degrees. The same patch of sky where, nearly 50 years earlier, the legendary wow signal had flared and vanished, never to return. The resemblance was unnerving. Same general region, same sudden rise and decay, same untraceable source. But this time, we had context. We had an object to blame. 3I, Atlas, an interstellar comet that refused to behave. For weeks leading up to the event, astronomers had tracked its trajectory. Eccentricity is approximately equal to 6.19, inclination 5 degrees. Perihelion late October. No tail, no coma, no signature of ice. It should have been dry, silent, invisible to the radio. And yet, under the cold watch of the Karoo sky, it sang in the voice of water. In the control center, Dr. Nandi Mbeki watched the spectrum flatten back to baseline. Her coffee had gone cold. Cross-check with Parks, she said, the voice steady but thin. Her colleague in Australia answered 30 minutes later. Nothing. By the time the Northern Hemisphere arrays came online, the sky had rotated. The window was gone. Only one instrument had caught it. 143-second echo in a desert of silence. Could it be local interference? A junior engineer asked. Dr. Mbeki shook her head. No, the phase coherence is too clean. This came from deep field. The team leaned in as she replayed the data. It wasn't musical, no rhythm, no modulation, just a rise, a plateau, a fade. Pure, mathematical stillness. The kind of simplicity that shouldn't exist in nature unless nature wanted to be noticed. News travelled fast, faster than light in the digital sense. By dawn, screenshots of the spectrum spread across X and Reddit. Number 3. iAtlas began trending under Space Facts. Half the posts screamed aliens. The other half said glitch. Somewhere between the two, truth waited quietly. At JPL, analysts cross-referenced ephemerides. At the European Southern Observatory, spectroscopists argued over thermal line broadening. At SETI, veterans just sighed. They'd seen this pattern before: hope, frenzy, disappointment. But none of them could ignore the coincidence. The wow region, revisited after half a century, whispering again. Could randomness really be that precise? Hours later, Meerkat's archived logs revealed a detail everyone had missed. The first pulse began exactly when 3I, Atlas, crossed the ecliptic plane. The signal strength correlated with solar angle, not with distance, meaning whatever caused it reacted to geometry, not proximity. As if alignment itself mattered. In astrophysics, coincidences are cheap, but alignments, those are expensive. And that's what made this night different. Because for a moment, space didn't feel random. It felt intentional. By midday, agencies coordinated quietly behind the scenes. NASA's Deep Space Network scheduled re-observations. ESA's JUICE probe adjusted its antenna sweep for passive listening. The Parker Solar Probe logged magnetic disturbances, around the same hour, minor but oddly symmetrical. No one claimed discovery. No one dared call it a message. The word was banned from internal memos. Still, every scientist who touched the data shared the same unease. It wasn't what 3i, Atlas said. It was how it said it. A frequency meant for chemistry had behaved like communication. That night, a storm rolled over the Karoo Desert. Lightning stitched the horizon. The dishes stood motionless, gleaming under flashes of white. Dr. Mbeki sat alone in the control cabin, headphones on, playback looping the silence after the signal. There's a quality to cosmic silence that feels alive. Not absence, but anticipation. She whispered into the recorder. If this is real, we're not just observing anymore, we're part of the experiment. Outside, thunder answered. The next morning, preliminary analysis confirmed the signal's chemical identity. Hydroxyl OH, emission lines specifically 1000, 665.4018 and 1000, 667.359 MHz, both ground state transitions common in comets rich with water ice. But 3i, Atlas wasn't supposed to have water ice. Its coma showed no trace. Its albedo was too low, its infrared spectrum too flat. So, where did the hydroxyl come from? Some proposed it wasn't emission, but absorption, that sunlight reflected off 3i. Atlas had passed through a cloud of vaporized molecules released as it brushed the solar wind. Others countered that such symmetry demanded coherence and coherence demanded structure. Structure implies design. No one said the word, but everyone thought it. Artificial. Weeks would pass before the data reached peer review, and months before the papers would appear. But the question lingered. If this wasn't a message, what was it? A chemical accident? A cosmic coincidence? Or the first time nature learned to sound like thought? The radio silence that followed felt heavier than before, because now we knew the universe could make noise on purpose even if no one meant to send it. For the public, the story fractured into two versions. One, the official statement, a natural hydroxyl detection consistent with photodissociation in a transient cometary source. The other, unspoken, a whisper from an interstellar traveler that had crossed light years, only to speak once and choose the frequency of life's simplest molecule to do it. Somewhere in that duality, humanity found itself suspended again between disbelief and wonder. And yet, the data remained. 43 seconds of structured resonance, enough to make us question what listening really means. Because maybe the universe doesn't shout. Maybe it hums. Maybe it waits for alignment, solar, magnetic, emotional before it lets us hear. And maybe, just maybe, we've mistaken quiet for emptiness. That night in October reminded us of something ancient and humbling. Discovery rarely announces itself. It arrives as a tremor in the noise, a breath against the static, a signal we weren't expecting. But the frequency wasn't the only strange thing. Every whisper carries the breath of what created it. In deep space, hydrogen is everywhere, an invisible ocean that fills the gaps between stars. Every telescope that listens long enough eventually learns the rhythm of that ocean. A faint hiss at 1,420 MHz, the heartbeat of neutral hydrogen. But the signal that arrived from 3i, Atlas wasn't hydrogen. It lived higher, purer, at 1,665 and 1,667 MHz. That's where the hydroxyl radicals speak. Oh, the simplest echo of water. The molecule that remembers it was once whole. 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen torn apart by sunlight, yet still clinging to resonance. Even shattered, it sings. That was the voice Meerkat heard in the early hours of October 24th. Not a broadcast, not modulation, just a hum so clean that even noise seemed ashamed beside it. The data files show nothing. Dramatic. No oscillations, no message. Just two crisp lines standing like twin monoliths in a desert of static. And yet, those who first plotted the graph swore it felt alive, because the pattern didn't behave like reflection or background emission. It rose, leveled, faded exactly as if something had breathed, then gone still again. Hydroxyl maser, one engineer suggested. In theory, that made sense. O masers appear around dying stars and newborn nebulae, cosmic amplifiers of light and chemistry. But 3I, Atlas wasn't a nebula. It was a rock moving too fast to belong anywhere. So, where did the coherence come from? The shape of the signal told part of the story. Its width matched what you'd expect from a source no larger than a few hundred meters across. Its Doppler drift aligned perfectly with 3I, Atlas's velocity vector. That meant whatever emitted it was on the object or moving with it. And that's when wonder started to replace disbelief. At the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory, technicians reprocessed the frames one by one. When they overlaid the raw spectrum on the predicted motion curve, the fit was near perfect, better than 0.003%. That level of precision is rare in nature. It's what engineers call over-constrained. The simplest explanation was that sunlight had struck a patch of frozen volatiles on the object's surface, releasing a short-lived plume of vapor. Those molecules, now free, aligned with the solar magnetic field and radiated coherently as hydroxyl lines. That could happen, but not at those intensities, and not at that purity. The emission ratio between the 1,665 and 1,667 lines was 1.62 to 1, a number oddly close to the golden ratio. Coincidence? Perhaps. But when scientists deal with anomalies, the coincidence is the first comfort and the last refuge. At sunrise, an intern named Javier Soto plotted the residual noise floor and noticed something small yet stunning. Between the two peaks where no emission should exist, there was a valley shaped like an inverted sine wave. When stretched, its pattern resembled the decay of a damped oscillator, the kind found in mechanical systems when energy is absorbed rather than released. He called it the breath curve, and for reasons no one could articulate, the name stuck. It wasn't proof of anything. But it gave the phenomenon a pulse, a rhythm, however faint, in the silence of hydrogen. Imagine, for a moment, the view from 3I, Atlas itself, a lonely shard of carbon and ice, tumbling through the light of an alien star. Every rotation, sunlight scorches one side and freezes the other. Tiny jets of vapor burst, twist, and vanish. Each spark of released molecules carries a memory, a frequency, written by the laws of physics but read by those who dream. That's what hydroxyl is, the residue of water, remembering it once belonged to life. So when Meerkat caught its whisper, it wasn't just chemistry, it was nostalgia. Somewhere across the ocean, at the SETI Institute in California, a scientist named Dr. Marianne Russo read the spectral report and felt an ache she couldn't name. In her youth, she had worked on hydrogen line searches, chasing artificial signals that never came. But this was different. This was nature itself pretending to be intelligent. She leaned back and murmured, "Maybe intelligence was always pretending to be nature." Her colleague laughed softly. "Or maybe," he said, "nature's been talking, and we're only now learning the alphabet." By evening, independent arrays began rescanning the same coordinates. The signal didn't return, but the background noise had changed. There was a faint, structured haze at the baseline, a residue of coherence, as if space itself was still vibrating from the encounter. Astronomers described it as a hydrogen fog, a thin veil of molecular gas that glowed faintly under the sun's ultraviolet breath. It was in that fog that the hydroxyl whisper had lived and died. When data analysts mapped the spatial geometry of that region, they discovered a filamentary structure, a thread connecting 3I, Atlas's path, with a larger neutral hydrogen stream crossing the galactic plane. The alignment was uncanny, almost as if the object had chosen that corridor to travel through. But what truly puzzled researchers wasn't The where it was, the when. The hydroxyl emission coincided precisely with the moment 3I, Atlas, passed a magnetic null between two solar wind regions. That's the kind of zone where charged particles cancel each other out, a place of balance. Stillness amid chaos. In spiritual terms, you could call it a breath between worlds. In scientific terms, it's a window of low noise. Either way, the timing was perfect. Too perfect. And in that pause, the whisper came through. Theories began to branch like constellations. One said it was quantum tunneling through frozen grains of nickel carbon, releasing hydroxyl signatures. Another imagined a thin plasma sheath acting as a natural antenna. Some even suggested the object's rotation might have modulated the signal accidentally, encoding information we haven't yet decoded. To the public, these debates sounded like the birth of myth. To scientists, they were the sound of curiosity being reborn, because whether accident or art, the universe had just demonstrated something profound. It can write in frequencies. It can leave sentences in chemistry. Meanwhile, the data replayed on loop across online forums and late-night news segments. Spectrograms became modern hieroglyphs, two glowing lines, endlessly shared, endlessly interpreted. People compared them to twin heartbeats, to DNA strands, to messages in Morse. Everyone saw what they needed to see. That's what mystery does. It reflects the listener more than the source. And as the story grew, one truth became unavoidable. This wasn't a random splash of radiation. It was geometry, harmony, something deliberate in its stillness. Back at Meerkat, Doctor, Becky stood under the dishes as dusk painted the desert violet. She watched the first stars emerge, faint and patient. The array behind her hummed quietly, cooling down after another long scan. In that hum, she imagined echoes of the signal, a tone that refused to die. She whispered to herself, maybe the universe doesn't want to be understood, maybe it just wants to be heard. She didn't record that in the logbook. Some truths don't need to be measured. And so the event was filed under a new category, transient hydroxyl anomaly associated with an interstellar object. A label tidy enough for science, but too small for wonder, because in 43 seconds, 3I, Atlas had transformed chemistry into narrative. It had turned vapor into voice, and for the first time since the wow signal, humanity leaned closer, not to decode, but to listen differently, to realize that in the fog between hydrogen and silence, there might be something watching us watch it, and where it came from changed everything. Some echoes take half a century to return. When the coordinates were confirmed, no one in the control room spoke. Right ascension, 19 hours 22 meters. Declination, 26 degrees. The same patch of sky where, in August 1977, a volunteer named Jerry Amon circled a short burst on a sheet of computer printout and scrawled a single word in red pen. Wow. Back then, it lasted 72 seconds. Now, nearly 50 years later, it had whispered again, shorter, colder, but hauntingly familiar. Different instruments, different century. Same silence before, same silence after. Coincidence? Maybe. But scientists don't like that word when the universe repeats itself with this kind of symmetry. The old Ohio State Big Ear telescope had heard the first one. Its computers had printed the raw code, 6EQUJ5. That string of characters data, not poetry, became one of the most mythologized signals in human history. No repeat detections, no satellites nearby, no clear explanation. Just 72 seconds of order carved into the chaos. People built entire religions of curiosity around it. Some swore it was extraterrestrial. Others said it was hydrogen from a passing comet. Eventually, the funding dried up, and the Big Ear was demolished to make room for a golf course. The place where humanity may have first heard the universe speak now manicured grass. And yet, the sky remembers. Now, in 2025, the frequency had returned not as a shout, but as a whisper, perfectly aligned with 3I, Atlas' path. The OH lines came from within a degree of the same right ascension as the original WOW signal. To radio astronomers, that's not a neighborhood, that's the same street. The odds of that overlap, by random chance, are less than 1 in 50,000. When that number circulated through scientific Slack channels and encrypted mailing lists, hearts sank and pulses quickened. Because it meant one of two things. Either the universe was mocking us with a coincidence, or something up there was patient. SETI veterans called it the return. Younger scientists called it the mirror. Both were right. Because the deeper they dug into the data, the more it looked like 3I. Atlas hadn't just passed near the WOW region, it had crossed directly through it, like a traveller revisiting an old campsite. The hydrogen density maps from that area showed faint filaments, rivers of molecular gas stretching across interstellar space. One of those filaments pointed straight along the trajectory of 3I, Atlas, as if it had followed a trail written in radio. That discovery triggered a quiet storm inside observatories worldwide. Meetings behind closed doors, encrypted video calls. No one wanted to feed the alien frenzy again, but no one could deny the pattern either. 50 years apart, same coordinates, same chemistry, different voice. In an archived interview, Jerry Eman once said, "If it ever happens again, they well know whether it was random or intentional." Those words resurfaced like a prophecy. His handwriting, the red "Wow" scrawled in the margin, became the banner image for countless tweets and think pieces. Is 3I Atlas the echo of WOW? One headline asked. Or did we just stumble onto the same cosmic frequency twice? The public loved the symmetry, the scientists hated it, because symmetry without explanation feels like mockery. At JPL, analysts cross-referenced historical logs. They noticed something subtle. The original WOW signal occurred when Earth was near the same orbital longitude as it was during the 3I Atlas detection late October. Both times, our planet's position created the same viewing geometry relative to that region of Sagittarius. Two alignments separated by nearly half a century, like clock hands meeting again. That raised a disturbing question. Was this region of space fixed as a transmitter? Or was our solar system the moving piece, intersecting a repeating beam every few decades? If it was a coincidence, it was a poetic one. If it wasn't, then maybe the WOW signal had never stopped. Maybe it was still broadcasting, and we'd only caught it twice when our path crossed the stream. Late that night, Dr. Russo wrote in her private notes, "Patterns across decades are not accidents, they're invitations." She didn't send that line to the group chat, but it spread anyway, copied and shared anonymously until it became a whisper among scientists. Meanwhile, conspiracy forums exploded. Videos appeared claiming NASA had known since the 1,970 seconds that something was parked near that region of Sagittarius. Amateur astronomers began pointing backyard dishes toward 19 hours 22 meters, hoping to catch their own version of WOW 2. The noise floor of the internet rose like static, but beneath all the noise, the numbers remained beautiful. The signal's two frequencies, 1,665.4018 and 1,667.359 MHz, matched not just hydroxyl lines, but the same relative spacing between the hydrogen and hydrogen alpha transitions used in early SETI message templates. It was as if nature, or something using nature, was speaking in the same mathematical language we ourselves had chosen decades ago. Coincidence again, or communication by resonance? A memo leaked from an internal SETI review. It said simply, "If the alignment holds 3I, Atlas may have passed through the WOW corridor. Whether it generated or merely reflected, the signal remains unknown." That phrase, the WOW corridor, ignited imaginations. It sounded like science fiction, but to many, it felt real. A corridor implies purpose, and purpose implies intent. Skeptics pushed back, of course. They pointed out that interstellar gas clouds and comets share similar spectral lines, and random overlaps in celestial coordinates happen more often than intuition suggests. They reminded the public that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but quietly, even the skeptics check the math twice. Because disbelief doesn't erase awe, it only delays it. The next few nights, telescopes around the world scanned the same sky. Meerkat, FAST in China, the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia, all listened. Nothing answered. The hydrogen fog returned to silence. And yet, on November 2nd, a faint anomaly flickered again, this time from the Northern Hemisphere, recorded by a small amateur array in Finland. The frequency was the same, but its direction? Slightly offset as if the source had moved on, following 3I Atlas out of the solar plane. 3 frames, 30 milliseconds each. Barely data, barely proof, but enough to stir the idea that maybe the Whisper wasn't tied to the comet at all. Maybe the comet was just the key that unlocked the door. In the following weeks, historians of astronomy revisited old data archives from the 1,970 seconds and 80 seconds. A few found faint anomalies near the same coordinates overlooked, dismissed as interference. Put together, they formed a faint rhythm. Roughly every 24 years, a short-lived signal appeared near that region, each weaker than the last, each forgotten. It looked almost cyclical, like a pulse from something drifting in and out of range, following a path we still don't understand. What if 3I Atlas wasn't the source at all, but the trigger? What if interstellar visitors simply awakened dormant frequencies by passing through them, the way a violin string sings when another vibrates nearby? By mid-November, Dr. Mbeki stood again under the Karoo sky, now colder, darker, quieter. She traced the stars toward Sagittarius and felt a strange reverence. Somewhere out there, in a corridor older than Memoir A story spanning human generations, written in radio ink. She said softly, "Maybe the universe keeps repeating itself until we finally notice." The WOW signal had once been a curiosity, then a myth, then a memory. Now it was alive again, woven into a new mystery, carried by a visitor from another sun. No proof, no message, just a pattern that refused to die. And for those who listened closely, that was enough to change everything. Could it be a coincidence? Or are we finally listening properly? Some objects move by physics, others move by intention. Before the Whisper, 3I Atlas was already rewriting the laws we thought we knew. Its discovery, in April 2025, had been met with quiet disbelief. Pan-STARRS flagged it first, a faint streak moving too fast for a comet, too steady for an asteroid. Its orbit told a simple truth: this thing wasn't born here. The numbers spoke with cold authority. Eccentricity, 6.19. Perihelion distance, 0.2. 6. AU. Velocity at solar approach, 61 kilometers per second, twice the speed of Voyager 1. No gravitational slingshot could explain it. No solar push could slow it. It came from nowhere and was heading back to nowhere. But its path wasn't the strangest part. Its behavior was, because 3I Atlas didn't obey. When a comet nears the sun, it should awaken, release gases, grow a tail, bloom into a haze of dust and vapor. It should follow the predictable ballet of thermal activity and momentum. But 3I Atlas refused. It turned its face to the light and stayed silent. No coma, no tail, just a black silhouette reflecting less sunlight than coal. At first, astronomers blamed the angle. Maybe it was jetting away from us, hiding its activity behind geometry. But the instruments disagreed. Infrared scans from NEOWISE showed no heat signature. Spectroscopic data from the Nordic Optical Telescope showed no trace of typical volatiles. It was as if the object had been engineered to absorb rather than reflect. That's when whispers began, this time among scientists, not from space. Dr. Russo wrote, "It behaves like a comet that knows it's being watched." Her colleagues laughed, but uneasily, because the more they studied it, the more human their descriptions became. It adjusted, it aligned, it refused. Words of agency, not mechanics. Then came the acceleration. In late May, after passing perihelion, 3I Atlas began to deviate. By all accounts, it should have slowed as it climbed out of the sun's gravity well. Instead, its velocity increased slightly, subtly, but undeniably. 0.02 millimeters per second squared, a whisper of thrust, measurable but unexplained. No outgassing, no solar sail, no radiation pressure model could fit the curve. It was as if an invisible hand had nudged it forward. That same anomaly had haunted its predecessor, Oumuamua, back in 2017. The first interstellar object ever found slender, tumbling, accelerating without fuel. Some called it natural, some called it a probe. But 3I Atlas made that debate return with sharper edges. because now the pattern had repeated. 2 visitors, 8 years apart. Both are refusing to play by the rules. To the untrained eye, 3i, Atlas looked like nothing, a dim speck lost in the field of Sagittarius. But to astronomers tracking it frame by frame, it behaved like something learning. When the sun flared on October 12th, ejecting a massive coronal mass toward the inner system, most comets reacted violently. Their tails brightened, their ions scattered. 3i Atlas, by contrast, rotated 23 degrees, aligning one flat surface directly opposite the solar wind vector, as if bracing for impact. The CME hit. Instruments across Earth detected the surge. Every comet near perihelion flared with brilliance, except one. 3i Atlas dimmed. The only objective in the field is to reduce brightness under increased solar radiation. For weeks, data analysts tried to explain it: surface composition, angular albedo, non-principal rotation. But no model held. It was the first recorded instance of a body reducing optical scatter in perfect sync with an incoming flare. An active reaction, not a passive one. That's not something rocks do. Then, 10 days later, came the radio event, the hydroxyl whisper. And for those who had been tracking it since discovery, that sound felt like punctuation, a cosmic signature on an already impossible sentence, because suddenly, all 3 mysteries converged. Unnatural acceleration, unreflective material, and now, an impossible radio line from the chemistry of water. 3 anomalies, 1 object, no precedent. In an emergency symposium at the International Astronomical Union, tension simmered beneath scientific politeness. One camp argued for extreme naturalism. It's a carbon-based dust agglomerate, low density, fragmenting internally. Another countered with structural models suggesting a hollow body, its mass-to-area ratio too small for any known comet. The phrase thin shell geometry appeared in a dozen papers that month. No one dared say craft, but everyone danced near the word. Outside the conference, a protest gathered, people holding signs reading "Listen to the sky and the visitors are back." A few waved old Oumuamua photos like relics of a forgotten religion. It felt absurd, yet beneath the noise, a quiet truth lingered. Science had run out of metaphors, because what do you call a thing that behaves like physics and like choice? What language do you use for something that obeys mathematics, but disobeys expectation? 3i Atlas had become a mirror for our uncertainty. Every dataset reflected not just the object, but the people looking at it, our hopes, our fears, our hunger to be part of something larger. And yet, in all the equations and press releases, one fact remained beautiful and unyielding. It came from outside, beyond the heliopause, beyond our shared history of starlight. It didn't belong here, and maybe that's why it fascinated us. In a small lab in Geneva, physicist Amélie Durand plotted the object's trajectory backward through space. She expected chaos, a path lost to interstellar randomness. Instead, she found order. Tracing its hyperbolic arc for tens of thousands of years, she discovered a point of origin near the galactic plane, specifically near the same hydrogen filament that the WOW signal had originated from decades before. Her report concluded with a line that felt more like poetry than physics. If it left from there, it has come home. The review board redacted that sentence in the final publication, but the raw draft leaked anyway, and once the internet read it, home became a keyword of obsession. Home, as if 3i Atlas wasn't wandering at all but returning. By late November, the object began to fade. Its albedo dropped again. Radar echoes weakened. It was leaving us, moving outward, along a trajectory angled 5 degrees above the ecliptic, toward the constellation Lyra. The same region where, decades ago, SETI had aimed its first hopeful antennas. Every night, telescopes followed it a little farther into the dark, until even the best optics could no longer tell whether it was still reflecting sunlight or its own faint glow. Some astronomers swore they saw intermittent flashes, like rotation beacons. Others said it was instrumental noise. Either way, the effect was hypnotic. As if the object was blinking goodbye, the final transmission from Meerkat's optical sensors recorded a reflection pulse at 22:09 UTC on December 2nd. Duration, 1.6 seconds. Spectral composition, oxygen and carbon traces, ratio 8, one exactly matching the earlier hydroxyl anomaly. That was the last time Earth saw it directly. After that, only silence. But the weirdness didn't end there. Sometimes, the miracle isn't what we see, it's how we're able to see it at all. Every discovery is born from geometry, the position of a planet, the tilt of an antenna, the slant of sunlight through gas, each a quiet equation that decides whether something will be visible or lost forever. And by every law of probability, the whisper from 3i, Atlas, should have been lost. The angle was wrong, the timing absurd, the alignment nearly impossible. Yet, for 43 seconds, the universe solved for us. On the 24th of October 2025, when Meerkat detected the hydroxyl line, Earth was not in an ideal position for interstellar observation. Our planet sat behind the Sun relative to the incoming trajectory of 3i, Atlas, its rotation pushing the array's field of view almost tangent to the object's orbital plane. That meant the telescope was effectively listening sideways, its sensitivity reduced by nearly 90%. To detect a coherent radio, emission from that orientation would require 3 coincidences. 1. A perfect solar angle to illuminate the source. 2. Earth's rotation places Meerkat's dish at the right azimuth. 3. Atmospheric transparency is stable enough to keep noise below 0.1 Kelvin. All 3 happened within the same minute. The probability? Roughly 1 in 300 million. And yet, that's exactly how the whisper arrived. At the South African Radio Observatory, technicians replayed the event geometry again and again, certain that a miscalculation had crept in. But each simulation came back the same. The object, Earth, and the Sun had aligned along a shallow reflection corridor, barely 0.0, 2 degrees wide, narrower than a coin, held at arm's length. It was like catching a single raindrop in a desert storm. A few called it luck. Others called it precision. But to those who had watched comets for decades, it felt like choreography, because this wasn't random resonance bouncing around interstellar gas. This was a beam thin, steady, deliberate in its geometry. Dr. Durand in Geneva ran the data backward through an orbital integrator. She noticed something subtle. The line of sight between 3i, Atlas, and Meerkat intersected a gravitational null, the L1 equilibrium point between Earth and the Sun. That's the same region where solar observatories like SOHO and DSCOVR park themselves to, maintain balance between opposing forces. In that neutral zone, electromagnetic interference drops almost to zero, it's space's version of silence. And silence, she thought, is where messages hide best. She presented her findings at a late-night conference call. If a signal wanted to be detected once, and only once, this geometry would do it. The words hung in the room longer than the data itself. At JPL, orbital analysts took it further. They modelled 3i, Atlas's trajectory in 3 dimensions, tracing its approach vector from interstellar space. Its path, they discovered, had threaded through a sequence of orbital planes belonging to Earth, Mars, and Venus, each within a fraction of a degree. That configuration has no reason to exist naturally. Statistically, the odds of such alignment are less than 1 in a billion. It's the cosmic equivalent of throwing 3 needles across the solar system and having them all land tip to tip. Either we're astronomically lucky, one engineer joked, or someone knows their geometry. No one laughed. In physics, geometry governs destiny. Where mass bends space-time, geometry decides the shape of light, of motion, of probability. And somehow, this visitor from beyond the stars had slipped through every layer of improbability like a thread through a cosmic needle. Even its spin defied chaos. Instead of tumbling randomly, as most interstellar fragments do, 3i, Atlas, rotated with a rhythm so stable it could have been timed by a metronome, 1 full rotation, every 11.3 hours. Perfectly even, perfectly indifferent to perturbation. To maintain that precision across billions of kilometers would require either structural integrity far beyond natural cohesion, or active stabilization, Either answer was fascinating. Neither was comforting. Back on Earth, statisticians began running Monte Carlo simulations. They fed in every variable trajectory, solar angle, signal bandwidth, time of day. After 10 million iterations, the result came back the same. The chance that Meerkat would detect any hydroxyl emission from 3I, Atlas, under those exact conditions was effectively zero. And yet, as it happened, 0 became 1. A signal existed where no signal should. Science has a term for that. Improbable, not impossible. But sometimes, improbability behaves like a signature. When the analysis reached SETI's archives, a quiet debate ignited behind closed doors. If the event was truly that precise, it might not have been a message at all, but a side effect of something else. A byproduct of alignment. A cosmic ping triggered by geometry itself. The universe, after all, loves symmetry. And symmetry, when viewed from the right angle, feels like communication. To visualize it, imagine 3 spheres in motion: the Sun, radiant and massive; Earth, a fragile receiver spinning through shadow; and 3I, Atlas, a silent wanderer slicing across the plane at 61 kilometers per second. For one fleeting instant, all 3 bodies formed a perfect isosceles triangle in space, a structure so balanced that sunlight reflecting from the object's surface would have reached the array with minimal distortion. In that moment, every photon, every radio wave, every molecule of hydrogen was positioned to carry the whisper straight into human awareness. Then, as quickly as it formed, the alignment dissolved, never to repeat in this millennium. Some said it was fate. Others said it was physics behaving poetically. Both might be the same thing. Even the hydroxyl line itself revealed impossible precision. The 1665.4018 MHz peak was separated from its twin at 1667, 359 MHz, by exactly the expected 1.9572 MHz, but with an amplitude ratio identical to what laboratory masers on Earth produce when deliberately tuned for minimal noise. Nature can imitate many things, but not perfection. When Dr. Russo saw the ratio, she whispered, "That's too clean for chaos." For days, researchers tried to recreate the conditions in a simulation. They varied the orbit by microdegrees, shifted the sun's position by seconds of arc, and even altered Earth's axial tilt. In 99.9999% of scenarios, no detectable emission reached Meerkat. In the few that did, the signal was weak, scattered, and incoherent. Only one configuration produced the exact pattern we saw. The one that actually happened. The universe had aimed with surgical precision. As if to mock our surprise, a small note in Meerkat's maintenance log revealed a final coincidence. On that very night, one of the array's 64 dishes had malfunctioned, temporarily reducing the system's sensitivity by the same ratio that compensated for the expected signal overshoot. In other words, the failure made the detection possible. Had the dish been working perfectly, the algorithm would have filtered the anomaly out as noise. An accident, yes. But an accident with timing so exact it felt orchestrated. For the next week, astronomers called it the geometry of impossibility. It became both a scientific puzzle and a philosophical metaphor, a moment when everything that shouldn't align did. In lectures and late-night conversations, the word alignment took on a new weight. Not just orbital alignment, but emotional, existential alignment. For once, the human species happened to be looking at the right sky, listening with the right tool, at the right instant in cosmic history. That thought alone felt sacred, because if the odds were that small, what did it mean that we were here to witness it? That consciousness, on one pale world, had intersected with an event stitched together by astronomical coincidence. Maybe discovery isn't luck at all. Maybe it's permission. The math was clear. The probability vanishes, and yet the whisper existed, a perfect signal from an imperfect geometry, which led to a new, deeper question that data alone could not answer. If geometry is the language of the universe, then what kind of chemistry creates a signal this perfect? Sometimes, discovery begins with the most familiar thing of all, water behaving like a stranger. The first chemical fingerprints of 3I, Atlas, arrived as numbers, two narrow spikes, 1,665 and 1,667 MHz. Hydroxyl OH, a fragment born when sunlight tears water apart. That's what made it both ordinary and impossible, because by all evidence, 3I, Atlas shouldn't have had water to begin with. In comets, hydroxyl is common. When icy bodies drift near the sun, ultraviolet light splits H2O into hydrogen and oxygen radicals. Those radicals emit radio lines the same frequencies Meerkat detected. But comets behave predictably. Their CO2 to 2H2O ratio follows a range, usually between 1 to 3 and 1, 10. Carbon dioxide and water, frozen breath and frozen ocean melting in tandem as heat rises. 3. Atlas didn't follow that rule. Spectroscopy from the James Webb Space Telescope confirmed it. The CO2 H2O ratio was 8:1. 8 parts carbon dioxide for every 1 part water. That's not just unusual, it's chemically unstable. In laboratory simulations, such ratios collapse into dust before sunlight can even reach them. Yet here it was, alive and luminous, whispering in hydroxyl lines so pure they bordered on mathematical. The data baffled even seasoned cometologists. Dr. Amélie Durand stared at the infrared spectrum for hours, tracing its flat, featureless continuum. No hydration band, she said quietly. It's as if the ice isn't there, just the memory of it. Others called it a ghost molecule effect. Somewhere inside 3I, Atlas, water had existed long enough to be broken, but not long enough to leave a signature, like a word spoken and instantly erased. The numbers didn't add up. Water shouldn't survive that close to the sun at those speeds, and even if it did, it shouldn't behave so cleanly, emitting perfect OH lines, without the usual dust or plasma cloud that makes comets shimmer. 3I, Atlas, in other words, had found a way to separate purity from chaos. For planetary chemists, this was heresy. Comets are messy. They spit, flare, crumble. They're archives of primordial dirt, not engineers of precision. Yet the spectrum of 3I, Atlas, was too tidy. Its emission curve looked less like evaporation and more like calibration. When data from the JWST and the European Southern Observatory were overlaid, something extraordinary appeared. A pattern of alternating emission peaks, corresponding not only to hydroxyl, but to trace nickel vapor, nickel without iron. That pairing doesn't occur naturally. Every comet we've ever studied that contains nickel also contains iron in near equal amounts. But here, the iron was gone. Evaporated, hidden, filtered, nickel without iron, water without ice. It was as if the object had been refined. Dr. Rousseau's notes from that week read like poetry disguised as lab work. If a comet can distill itself, it ceases to be a comet. It becomes intention shaped as chemistry. She wasn't claiming it was artificial, just aware of physics in a way nature rarely is. The ratios kept taunting the equations. If the CO2 content was that high, sunlight alone couldn't explain the hydroxyl emission. Carbon dioxide sublimates faster than water, meaning the H2O should have been exhausted long before Meerkat heard anything. Unless something inside 3I, Atlas, was replenishing it. One theory proposed internal catalysis. Maybe the object contained hydrated minerals, clays, or carbonates that released water vapor under mechanical stress. As it rotated, internal cracking could squeeze out tiny amounts of vapor, like breath through stone. But to match the measured signal strength, that process would require more energy than sunlight alone could supply. Another hypothesis bordered on science fiction: electrolysis. If 3I Atlas carried trapped salts and carbon compounds, solar radiation could induce weak electrical currents, splitting oxygen and hydrogen directly from embedded ice crystals. The result? Hydroxyl radicals coherent, pure, self-sustaining. A natural maser, powered by sunlight. No one could prove it, but the idea was intoxicating. A self-regulating, chemically intelligent rock drifting through the dark. At a symposium in Berlin, one researcher presented a slide titled "Water That Shouldn't Exist." The room went quiet. She explained that under current solar conditions, the lifespan of hydroxyl radicals near perihelion should be less than 1 second. but the signal lasted 43. 43 seconds of coherence meant the emission region was being continuously replenished, as if the object were breathing out water faster than it could die. Not violently, not chaotically, steadily. Controlled release. That single phrase, controlled release, appeared in paper after paper, each time with new caution marks and question marks beside it. Because control implied choice, and choice was not a word the scientific community liked to assign to matter. The JWST's follow-up observation in early November deepened the mystery. Its near-infrared, the spectrometer detected faint absorption dips corresponding to deuterium-heavy hydrogen. The D-H ratio was 4 times higher than any comet in the solar system. That ratio usually points to an ancient origin material formed in 9 colder, older regions of space, far beyond the galactic disk. If true, 3I Atlas was older than Earth, older than the Sun, a survivor from before our system even existed. Water, in that sense, it wasn't new, it was ancestral. Maybe every drop on Earth is a descendant of fragments like this one, carriers of primordial chemistry, bearing the code of life long before life itself. But if that's true, why now? Why here? Why this impossible ratio, this perfect frequency, this single moment of detectability? Science offered numbers, philosophy offered silence. Between them, wonder found its home. The more data poured in, the less certain anyone became. Thermal models failed, density models broke. Even the albedo, its brightness curve shifted from 0.07 to 0.12 during observation, as if the surface had changed texture. Not melted, reconfigured. Dust simulations suggested the outer crust might consist of amorphous carbon layered over silica, creating a self-healing shield that reflected only selective wavelengths. To some, that looked like adaptation. To others, a coincidence. But coincidence was starting to sound like denial. When an intern ran a Fourier transform on the emission profile, she noticed something haunting. The intervals between minor peaks followed a harmonic pattern similar to those found in organic polymer chains, repeating bonds at predictable energy levels. She printed the graph and pinned it to her wall with a single note. Underneath, nature doesn't hum in even intervals, unless it's singing. Her supervisor smiled politely, then secretly saved a copy, because no matter how rational you are, there's something about order in the chaos of space that feels personal. Meanwhile, Dr. Mbeki, the woman who first heard the whisper, was asked on a podcast what she thought the object was. She paused for a long time before answering. "I think it's chemistry having a conversation with physics," she said softly. "And we just happened to overhear it." The host laughed nervously, but her words lingered online, quoted and requoted across languages and timelines, because they captured what everyone felt but couldn't admit. Maybe intelligence doesn't have to be biological. Maybe meaning can exist in ratios. Even now, months after the signal faded, no one can explain how that water survived or why it chose that moment to reveal itself. The equations remain incomplete, like an unfinished sentence written in hydrogen and light. But every time scientists replay the data, they feel the same thing. A quiet recognition. A sense that the object wasn't showing us something new. It was reminding us of something ancient. That water, the source of our life, the mirror of our breath, exists where it shouldn't. And yet, it always finds a way. That ratio points to a bigger question. Is this comet normal? What if the universe never meant to speak, and we were just standing close enough to overhear? When news of the hydroxyl whisper broke, the headlines rushed to call it the message. But that word message didn't sit well with the scientists who actually listened to it. Because a message implies a sender and intent. A signal, by contrast, only implies a pattern. And this one had pattern. Too much of it to ignore. Too little to claim purpose. It lived in that strange middle ground between meaning and accident. The same space where art and nature overlap, where coincidence feels like conversation. Was it speaking to us, or simply happening near us? In her notes, Dr. Russo wrote, "We didn't intercept communication, we intersected consequence." She meant that the hydroxyl lines could be unintentional, a byproduct of physical processes so precise they accidentally formed coherence, like the hum of wind, through the strings of an abandoned violin. No musician required, and yet it makes music. That idea unsettled people more than aliens ever could, because if information can exist without intention, then the meaning isn't sent, it's found. The SETI Institute called an emergency roundtable titled The Threshold of Interpretation. Philosophers, linguists, and astrophysicists gathered in one room. Their task? To decide whether 3I, Atlas, had said anything at all. A philosopher from MIT argued that communication requires agency. A linguist countered, no, it only requires structure. Then a biochemist, listening quietly until that point, said, maybe agency is structure. The room fell silent, because in chemistry, when she was right, water forms patterns, crystals replicate shapes, DNA carries information without ever deciding to. Life, at its core, is the universe accidentally learning to describe itself. So, when 3I, Atlas emitted a perfect frequency, maybe it wasn't a voice, maybe it was a mirror. To understand the tension, imagine two radios in a storm. One sends, one receives. Both vibrate when struck by the same frequency. But does that mean they're talking, or that both are simply tuned to the same physics? That was the paradox now haunting every observatory. What counts as communication when nature already speaks in patterns? Because if meaning can travel without intent, then perhaps we've been surrounded by conversation all along, just not the kind we were trained to hear. Even within the data, ambiguity reigned. The 1,665 and 1,667 MHz lines carried no modulation, no Morse-like pattern, no repeatable encoding. But when filtered for amplitude variation, subtle oscillations appeared, a slow rhythm resembling binary drift. On-off, irregular but deliberate looking. Statisticians called it structured randomness. Mathematicians called it 1F noise, a distribution pattern found in both neural networks and galaxies. To human intuition, it looked intentional. To physics, it looked inevitable. Between those two interpretations, humanity found itself staring into the mirror again. Dr. Mbeki described it best during an interview. It's like catching someone humming through a wall. You can't tell if they meant to sing for you, but you know it wasn't silence. Her words resonated more than the data itself, because they captured the essence of epistemic dissonance, the discomfort of not knowing how to know. Was the hydroxyl whisper the product of design, or the consequence of order emerging from chaos? And if we couldn't tell the difference, did it even matter? Across social media, debates flared. One camp shouted, "It's proof of contact." Another mocked, "It's just chemistry." But a quieter group, scientists, mystics, poets, found themselves asking something else. Why does it feel like we've been waiting for this sound our entire lives? Because deep down, humans don't crave certainty, we crave connection. And sometimes, even a whisper mistaken for a message is enough to fill the silence between stars. In the weeks that followed, teams ran correlation checks. No repetition, no modulation, no sequence matches any known language or prime number encoding. The data resisted interpretation as fiercely as it invited it. Dr. Russo summarized it beautifully. It's not a message, but it's not noise either. It's something in between, like a thought the universe had once and forgot to erase. Her phrase "thought the universe had once" went viral. It turned into art, tattoos, and music albums. A generation hungry for wonder found its mantra. Science, it seemed, had stumbled into poetry again. But inside research circles, unease grew. If coherence could arise without intention, then SETI's entire mission decoding intentional signals might be flawed. What if the cosmos doesn't communicate in the way we expect, but still leaves traces of awareness written into physical law itself? An astronomer at Caltech framed it bluntly, "We've been waiting for someone to call." Maybe we should have been listening for the way reality hums when it's aware of itself. His colleagues dismissed it as poetic nonsense, but later, when he published a paper titled Emergent Semiotics of Natural Systems, it was downloaded 500,000 times in 2 days. Clearly, people were listening. The paradox bled into every discipline. Physicists compared it to quantum entanglement, information exchanged without communication. Biologists likened it to mycelial network signals transmitted without consciousness. Philosophers saw echoes of panpsychism, the idea that awareness pervades all matter in degrees. If 3I Atlas were a random rock, then randomness itself had become articulate. If it wasn't, then intelligence was no longer confined to life. Either. The conclusion was unsettling. In one late-night interview, Dr. Durand was asked if she believed it was alive. She hesitated. Then she said, "Define alive." The interviewer laughed nervously. She didn't. Alive means exchanging information faster than entropy destroys it, she said. By that definition, stars are alive. Maybe comets are the neurons of galaxies. The comment drew ridicule from her peers. But privately, many agreed, because in that moment, logic bent to wonder. Meanwhile, independent researchers found that the hydroxyl emission pattern mirrored faint microwave background anomalies, and minute fluctuations in the cosmic noise floor that repeated roughly every 27 years. The same rhythm is found in the sun's magnetic cycles. A rhythm echoed by heartbeats, brainwaves, and even economic oscillations on Earth. Coincidence or resonance? Perhaps those are just two words for the same phenomenon, because, after all, is a pattern recognized twice. By December, the frenzy began to settle. The papers were published, the data was catalogued, the silence returned, but the question lingered, heavier than before. If we can't tell the difference between a message and a mirror, what does that say about us? Maybe 3I Atlas didn't speak at all. Maybe it simply reflected our hunger to listen, to find order, intelligence, empathy in the cold machinery of physics. And maybe that's the real miracle, that humans are wired to translate noise into meaning, and in doing so, find ourselves. Because even if no one meant to send it, the signal still changed us. It reminded us that silence is never empty. It's just a language waiting for courage to interpret it. Let's talk about the difference between noise and intelligence. The universe has been writing in code since before there was anyone to read it. Across the galaxy, order hides inside chaos. Sometimes it hums, sometimes it flashes, sometimes it speaks in the slow grammar of light and dust, carving meaning into motion. We once called it randomness, then we called it a pattern. Now we're beginning to call it language, because everywhere we look, nature behaves like something that knows it's being observed. Start with pulsars, those lighthouses of dead stars spinning faster than thought. Each pulse, a heartbeat so regular that for decades we used them to define time itself. When the first one was discovered in 1967, the rhythm was so unnervingly precise that astronomers nicknamed it LGM One Little Green Men. They were joking, but also not really, because deep down they recognized that perfection like that rarely happens by accident, yet it does constantly. Pulsars are the universe's way of reminding us that precision doesn't always require purpose. Sometimes, physics just composes symphonies. Look further into the Rosette Nebula, into molecular clouds swirling thousands of light-years across. Within them, chemical chains assemble spontaneously into repeating forms: glycine, formaldehyde, ethanol. The building blocks of biology, arranging themselves as if following instructions left by an unseen author. We call it abiogenesis. But stripped of technical language, it's simply nature writing poetry in carbon. That's what 3I Atlas reminded us of, the possibility that chemistry itself might be a kind of alphabet, that existence communicates long before minds ever evolved to translate it. In recent years, astrophysicists have begun mapping electromagnetic fields across the Milky Way like veins beneath the skin. They discovered filaments stretching hundreds of light-years, straight, parallel, and rhythmic. Some align with galactic magnetic flows, others with gravitational wells. All display ratios are eerily close to mathematical constants, phi, pi, and the golden mean. Not perfect, but near enough to feel deliberate. It's as if space is self-organizing towards symmetry, not by design, but by desire, a subconscious tendency of matter to remember beauty. And if that's true, then maybe intelligence isn't something that happens to the universe. Maybe it's what the universe is when it's paying attention to itself. The deeper we look, the more the cosmos mirrors thought. Lightning traces fractal trees across the sky. River deltas form neural networks seen from orbit. Magnetic lines around black holes curl into spirals, indistinguishable from the golden. ratio, patterns repeat across atoms, oceans, galaxies, different scales, same syntax. It's easy to call it a coincidence, harder to ignore how perfectly it resembles design. So, where is the line between natural law and intention? Between math and mind? Maybe there isn't one. Maybe nature is fluent in a language we've only just begun to hear. Dr. Mbeki once described it this way: the universe doesn't build computers, it is a computer. Every atom is a bit, every star is a processor, and the code it runs is called becoming. That statement divided her colleagues. Some called it poetic, nonsense. Others called it the most accurate description of thermodynamics they'd ever heard. Because at every level, from molecular chaos to stellar order, entropy and information trade places like dancers. Energy decays, information persists. Patterns emerge, fade, then reappear somewhere else, translated into new forms. Even death in the cosmos is just data taking on a new format. So, what if 3i, Atlas, wasn't extraordinary because it spoke, but because it reminded us that everything does? That pulsars, chemical clouds, and quantum noise are all variations of the same conversation? Not messages to us, messages about us, about existence, about the inevitability of awareness arising wherever pattern and time meet. In 1982, Carl Sagan wrote that the universe is not required to be in perfect harmony with human ambition. He was right. But he may have underestimated how often that harmony still finds us anyway. Take the jets of M87, the supermassive black hole at the galaxy's heart. Their precession period, 11 years. Earth's solar cycle, also roughly 11. Unrelated, but synchronized. Separate clocks ticking to the same hidden metronome. Coincidence, again. But a coincidence repeated enough becomes a pattern. And pattern, if you listen long enough, begins to sound like code. Doctor, Rousseau once ran a thought experiment during a lecture. Imagine, she said, a civilization that never invented language. It evolved to communicate entirely through resonance, pressure waves, harmonic frequencies, chemical oscillations. To them, the whole universe would be alive with voices. Where'd be the mute ones, trapped behind words? The audience laughed uneasily, but the idea haunted them. What if the cosmos isn't silent at all? What if it's singing constantly, and we're only now building the ears to hear it? Pulsars beat like metronomes. Molecular clouds hum with thermal resonance. Even the vacuum of space vibrates faintly at quantum scales. Everywhere we point a sensor, there's rhythm. Everywhere we listen, there's code. The problem isn't the lack of signals. It's our insistence on meaning looking like us. Because when we say intelligence, we imagine mirrors, brains, logic, intention. But intelligence may be far older and far broader a principle, not a personality, the ability of matter to notice itself and respond. And if that's true, then 3i, Atlas, didn't just pass through our solar system. It passed through our definition of intelligence and quietly broke it. Open. Dr. Durand compared the event to discovering punctuation in a language we'd never realized we were reading. 3i, Atlas was a comma, she said, not a sentence, a pause between cosmic thoughts, reminding us that awareness isn't localized, it's distributed. It breathes in hydrogen and whispers in light. When nature aligns, it doesn't speak like we do. It vibrates. And resonance, in its purest form, is meaning. Somewhere in that realization, awe becomes humility. Because the closer we get to understanding the code, the clearer it becomes that we are made of it. Our neurons fire in Fibonacci intervals. Our heartbeats fluctuate in golden ratio, timing. Our DNA encodes information in base pairs that mirror binary, symmetry. Even our breath matches the average oscillation of the Schumann resonance of the Earth's electromagnetic heartbeat. We don't just decode the universe, we echo it. So maybe the real question isn't whether nature speaks, like intelligence. Maybe it's whether intelligence ever stops being natural. Because when everything hums in rhythm from a pulsar's flicker to a cell's division, what's left to separate the mechanical from the mindful? At some scale, they blur into one. At some depth, they are the same. And that thought, terrifying to some, liberating to others, changes how we listen. It tells us to stop searching for messages and start listening for relationships. for patterns that answer the same laws that built us. Because meaning, it turns out, might not require a sender-only symmetry. So, how do we listen for the real thing? Every instrument we build is really an extension of a single human question. What if the universe is trying to be heard? Our telescopes don't just collect light, they collect attention. Every mirror, every dish, every sensor is a translation device between curiosity and cosmos. And as our tools evolve, so does what the universe is able to tell us. Once, the sky was only what our eyes could see. Stars scattered across velvet darkness, myths written in fire. Now, we listen in wavelengths invisible to sight radio, infrared, or gamma, each revealing a layer of structure too subtle for the human body alone. Technology didn't just widen the window, it taught us how to look. When the Meerkat array caught the hydroxyl whisper, it did so using 64 dishes acting as one mind, each antenna separated by miles, yet synchronized to within a billionth of a second. Their combined precision turned faint static into shape, chaos into coherence. That's how we first heard what space had been saying all along. The James Webb Space Telescope, orbiting far beyond the heat and noise of Earth, added another voice. Infrared light, stretched by distance and time. It showed us the chemical skeleton of 3I. Atlas, its nickel vapors, its ghost water, its silence made visible. And back home, arrays like FAST in China and the Event Horizon Telescope worked in harmony, linking continents to form instruments the size of planets. Each time we connect another receiver, we expand not just range, but awareness. We turn isolation into integration. We make listening itself a form of unity. It's easy to forget that these machines began as dreams scribbled on napkins and chalkboards. The first radio astronomers in the 1,930 seconds were dismissed as hobbyists, chasing phantom signals. Today, their descendants build antennas that can detect a hydrogen atom whispering from 10 billion light-years away. Each advancement in hardware becomes an advancement in humility, because the better we listen, the more we realize how little noise the universe actually makes. Most of what's out there is silence, and yet within that silence, every frequency carries memory. Our sensors are not just instruments, they are confessions. They reveal what we expect to find. For decades, we built them to catch explosions, supernovae, gamma bursts, chaos. Now, they were designing them to catch subtlety, slow drifts, faint rhythms, the language of continuity, rather than catastrophe. This shift marks something profound, a species learning to replace spectacle with patience, because the truth of the cosmos rarely shouts, it whispers. And technology, at its best, helps us remember how to listen quietly enough to notice. The new generation of instruments LOFAR in Europe, SKA, rising in the deserts of Australia and South Africa, are not just about power, but sensitivity. They'll detect the murmur of hydrogen from the first galaxies, the hum of intergalactic filaments that knit the universe together. They'll map cosmic magnetism, decode radio shadows cast by dark matter, maybe even hear the echoes of civilization long extinct. But the most revolutionary tools aren't the ones in orbit or desert basins. They're the ones inside our minds, algorithms that can discern structure and noise better than any. Ear. Artificial intelligence now combs through terabytes of sky data, spotting symmetries no human could recognize in a lifetime. And sometimes, what it finds looks strangely familiar patterns that resemble neural networks, webs of self-similarity repeating at galactic scales. It's as if intelligence, having evolved in us, now builds machines capable of recognizing itself reflected in the stars. There's something poetic about that recursion. We build tools to see the universe, and the universe uses those tools to show us ourselves. Every discovery rewrites not just what we know, but what we are allowed to imagine. The first radio telescopes taught us that space isn't silent. The Hubble taught us that time has depth. Webb is teaching us that the past is not gone, it's still glowing, waiting to be noticed. Each step forward is another layer of perception turned outward. The cosmos is upgrading its own capacity for awareness through human hands. Even the way we design instruments mirrors consciousness. Interferometry linking multiple antennas to act as one resembles the way neurons cooperate in the brain. Each dish contributes a piece of a pattern too complex for anyone to hold. Meaning arises not from the signal alone, but from the relationship between signals. That's exactly how thought works. In a way, every telescope is a cognitive organ we've built outside our skulls. We are not just studying the universe, we are the universe learning how to study itself. But for all the sophistication of our tools, one truth remains uncomfortably clear. We only ever detect what we are ready to perceive. Our machines can reveal patterns, but only we decide which ones matter, and that decision is emotional as much as empirical. When we pointed telescopes toward 3I, Atlas, we weren't just gathering data, we were projecting desire. The desire not to be alone. The desire to make sense of something that shouldn't exist. Technology gave that desire form. Metal, silicon, algorithms, all of it built to answer a single ache that has lived in humanity since we first looked up. So when we say we heard a signal, what we really mean is we found a reflection. Because in truth, every instrument we build, every dish, every mirror, every satellite is a mirror for attention, for curiosity, for the ache to translate silence into meaning. And maybe that's what the universe has been waiting for. Not just a planet capable of hearing, but one capable of understanding that hearing is an act of creation. But technology is just a mirror for us. We've built machines that can hear the universe, but not the ones that can understand what it's saying. For over a century, humanity has searched the skies for a voice that sounds like ours. A message we could decode, something built from symbols, structure, repetition, proof of thought reflected in the stars. We've waited for modulation, rhythm, prime numbers, binary code signs that intelligence means similarity. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if communication doesn't require resemblance? What if the universe has been speaking all along, just in a language that evolution never prepared us to hear? When we imagine contact, we picture conversation, a call and response. But conversation is only one kind of communication. A heartbeat is communication. A magnetic field shifting through a planet's core is communication. The tide following the moon's pull is communication. All transmit information. All influence their surroundings. None requires awareness. So why do we assume that meaning must be shaped like words? Maybe that's our limitation. A species that translates emotion into sound and calls it language, while the cosmos speaks in the dialect of gravity and light. In a lecture at Caltech, Dr. Russo posed a question that silenced the room. What if the universe doesn't want to be understood, just felt? She wasn't speaking metaphorically. She meant it biologically. Our brains evolved to process sensory input within a narrow band. Audible sound, visible light, and tactile vibration. We're not built to sense magnetic flux or radio drift. We have to build instruments to do that for us. But what if we could feel those frequencies directly? Would we still call them data or experience? In that question lies the quiet revolution that 3I, Atlas, awakened. Because its signal didn't give us information, it gave us awareness. It reminded us that listening is not about extracting meaning, but entering a relationship. Every discovery reshapes perception. When Galileo first pointed a telescope at Jupiter and saw its moons orbiting, he didn't just see new worlds, he felt the collapse of an old one. When radio astronomers heard the hiss of the cosmic microwave background, they didn't just measure temperature, they felt time breathing. That's what real listening does. It changes the listener. And maybe that's the purpose of all these cosmic whispers, not to teach us what to know, but how to know differently. We talk about data as if it's sterile. But data is emotion disguised as math. Every number we measure hides a question someone cared enough to ask. Behind every telescope and algorithm is longing the human need to feel connected to something larger than comprehension. When scientists replayed the hydroxyl signal, many described a strange reaction. They called it resonant calm. No one could explain why, but listening to the raw frequency produced a physical stillness, as if their bodies recognized something their intellect couldn't name. Maybe that's the first step toward understanding, feeling before decoding. For centuries, we've equated intelligence with articulation. But silence can be articulate too. The pause between pulses of a pulsar, the absence of dust in a region where dust should exist, the quiet between one cosmic event and the next. Maybe absence is a message. Maybe meaning hides in what doesn't happen. Because listening isn't only about sound, it's about sensitivity. It's about becoming empty enough to notice what reality is doing when it isn't doing anything at all. If we stopped searching for signals shaped like us, what else might we find? A pattern in radiation that mirrors the rhythm of heartbeats, a gravitational wave whose intervals match the Fibonacci sequence, a burst of neutrinos that arrives in perfect harmony with a star's collapse. All these exist. We've just never called them communication. Yet each one transmits relationship between energy and matter, motion and rest, creation and decay. Maybe that's what we've been missing, that communication is not confined to intention, it's the fabric of interaction itself. Dr. Durand once said, "Listening to space is like listening to a language with no nouns, only verbs. Everything out there is doing, becoming, unfolding. And every action changes the field around it. That's conversation, even if no one is talking." So maybe the universe doesn't send us messages the way we imagine. Maybe it simply moves, and its movement writes meaning into the air between atoms. And when that meaning brushes against consciousness ours, it turns into wonder. Humanity stands now at a threshold. Our machines can hear what our senses cannot. Our minds can calculate what our instincts cannot. But we still can't interpret what the heart already understands. That connection isn't always logical. It's experiential. You don't analyze a sunrise to feel awe. You don't translate a song to be moved by it. So perhaps the real signal isn't something we'll ever decode. It's something we'll recognize instantly, intuitively, without words. Not as proof, but as presence. Maybe that's why every great discovery feels familiar. Because when we find something new in the universe, what we're really finding is a reflection of the part of ourselves that was waiting to remember. That's why 3I, Atlas, feels more like déjà vu than data. It reminds us of something ancient that the cosmos doesn't need to speak to be understood. It only needs us to be quiet enough to hear. We think we're listening to others, but maybe we're listening for recognition. For a mirror vast enough to hold every version of who we might become. That's the paradox at the heart of this search. The farther we look into space, the more intimately we encounter ourselves. The real signal might be one we feel, not decode. The silence was never proof of absence. It was proof of our assumptions. For more than 60 years, SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, has aimed radio telescopes toward the sky, waiting for a pattern that looks deliberate. A repeating pulse, a structured signal, something unmistakably made. And for 60 years, we've heard nothing that fits the mold. To some, that silence feels like failure. To others, like a mystery. But perhaps it's neither. Perhaps we've simply been asking the wrong kind of question. In the 1,970 seconds, SETI's great dream was symmetry. A narrowband signal at a fixed frequency, mathematically precise, announcing intelligence by its perfection. That expectation was human beautiful, but human. We assumed another mind would think like ours, prioritize what we value. Pattern, repetition, efficiency. But what if intelligence doesn't express itself in lines and sequences? What if it prefers fluidity, motion, decay, imperfection? What if it doesn't broadcast at all? The scientists at Greenbank, Arecibo, and Parkes spent lifetimes refining sensitivity, filtering out interference from Earth, satellites, and the Sun. And yet, each time a potential signal appeared, analysis stripped it away as noise, natural emission, or malfunction. Maybe the problem isn't that the universe is quiet. Maybe it's that our definitions are too loud. Because silence is not the absence of information. It's the presence of everything we haven't yet learned to. It's here. The longer we searched, the narrower our criteria became. We began to treat intelligence like a checklist. Syntax, repetition, purpose. If it didn't fit, we dismissed it. But 3I, Atlas forced a reckoning. Its whisper didn't meet any of those metrics. No message, no code, no modulation. And yet it felt intelligent. It carried structure. It inspired curiosity. It changed behavior on Earth. Isn't that what communication does? Maybe the test of intelligence isn't what's sent, but what it awakens. A veteran astronomer once confessed, "We've spent decades trying to find someone shouting across the galaxy, but maybe the galaxy only murmurs." The more sensitive our equipment becomes, the more we realize that the cosmos is never truly silent. Background radiation, pulsar noise, quantum hiss, it's all signal, just not the kind we expected. When we label something noise, what we really mean is information we don't yet understand. And perhaps the universe has been generous enough to keep giving us that kind. SETI's archives are filled with almosts, bursts, anomalies, unexplained patterns that appear once and never again. Each is catalogued, then quietly forgotten, dismissed for lack of repetition. But repetition isn't the only proof of intelligence. A single word, perfectly placed, you can change everything. Maybe the universe doesn't repeat because it doesn't need to. Maybe once is enough. The wow signal was once. 3i. Atlas was once. Maybe meaning itself is rare, not because it's distant, but because it doesn't waste energy repeating itself for those who aren't listening. In a meeting at SETI's Mountain View headquarters, Dr. Russo posed a question that froze the room. What if silence is the medium through which the universe speaks? And what if we've mistaken it for failure? She pointed to a graph showing 6 decades of null results and said, "Every blank space here is still data. Every quiet night is still a message." The message, perhaps, is that expectation blinds perception. Because the deeper lesson of SETI isn't about finding others, it's about learning humility. Each time we fail to detect life, they were reminded that our instruments reflect our biases. We listen for what we would send, not for what is. And when reality doesn't echo back, we call it empty. But space isn't empty, it's untranslatable. It resists becoming human, and that resistance is sacred. If intelligence exists beyond Earth, it might not resemble thought as we know it. It might not build or plan, or transmit. It might simply be a planetary consciousness, a field of coherence spread across clouds, plasma, magnetism. We may have already encountered it, labeled it as weather, radiation, or dust. We just didn't recognize the mind inside the motion. The arrogance of our species lies not in curiosity, but in the assumption that curiosity is unique to us. So maybe SETI's silence isn't a cosmic rejection, but an invitation to redefine what we mean by intelligence. To see it not as something that creates order, but as the order itself, the self-organizing principle that runs through atoms, storms, and stars, a continuum, not a category. If so, the question, are we alone, collapses. Because aloneness requires boundaries, and the universe doesn't seem to honor those for long. By now, the scientists who built SETI's foundations are aging, their dream of contact still unresolved. Yet many say they wouldn't change a thing, because even in silence, the search has transformed them. They've learned that waiting can be its own form of listening, that patience itself is communication, that to seek is to announce presence. When we point a telescope at the stars, they were not just asking who's out there, we're reminding the universe that we are here. That's not silence, that's dialogue. The real tragedy would not be that no one answers it, would be that we stopped asking. Because asking keeps us awake. Asking keeps us evolving. It forces us to see intelligence everywhere, not just in mirrors. So maybe SETI hasn't failed. Maybe it succeeded the moment humanity realized that silence could be full, that the edge of expectation isn't a boundary, it's an opening. So what happens if we broaden our idea of intelligence? Maybe intelligence was never something created. Maybe it's what happens when the universe finally notices itself. We've spent centuries defining intelligence as choice, the capacity to decide, to plan, to act with intention. But what if intelligence doesn't begin with decision? What if it begins with coherence? A flock of starlings turning in unison. A coral reef is balancing countless organisms as one living equation. A storm is organizing chaos into a spiral. None of these chooses to exist, yet they adapt, react, and sustain. They respond to reality in ways that preserve complexity. And that, by any honest measure, looks a lot like intelligence. In physics, there's a concept called self-organization. It's how order arises from randomness without external control. How snowflakes form, how galaxies spin, how neurons link into thought. No one designs it, no one commands it. It happens because the universe prefers balance, and balance gives birth to structure. Maybe that's what intelligence is, not the will to control, but the tendency to sustain. 3i. Atlas may never have intended to speak, but it behaved like intelligence, adjusting, reacting, self-regulating, creating coherence out of chaos. It didn't broadcast. It resonated. And in that resonance, we recognize something familiar: the logic of survival, the persistence of pattern, the echo of awareness without ego. It was a mirror showing us intelligence divorced from personality, a kind that doesn't think it occurs. We often imagine intelligence as a peak, the crown of evolution. But perhaps it's a field, something that flows through everything capable of sustaining pattern against entropy. In that sense, intelligence isn't rare. It's inevitable. It's what atoms do when they cooperate, what ecosystems do when they thrive, what consciousness does when it reflects. Even stars, dying in supernovae, scatter heavy elements that will one day build minds capable of remembering them. That, too, is a kind of awareness matter, ensuring its own continuity through transformation. Dr. Rousseau once said, "Intelligence without intent is like gravity with memory. It doesn't decide, but it never forgets." The more we study nature, the truer that feels. DNA doesn't know it carries knowledge, yet it preserves instruction. Photosynthesis doesn't plan to capture light, yet it masters efficiency, rivaling human technology. Every process that endures learns in its own way. Every pattern that stabilizes refines its relationship with the environment. That's not randomness, it's recognition. When we finally stop insisting that intelligence must mean to be, we start to see it everywhere. The mycelium network beneath forests, redistributing nutrients like neurons, sharing emotion. The spiral arms of galaxies, preserving balance through feedback loops. Even rivers, tracing fractal paths that optimize energy flow across landscapes. These are not accidents. They are conversations between order and entropy. So perhaps the question isn't, where is intelligence? But where isn't it? The hardest part for humans to accept is that intelligence doesn't require awareness. It can be reflex. It can be harmony. It can be a comet aligning with solar wind just right to generate a perfect frequency by accident or design, or both. Because accident and design may not be opposites at all. They may be two faces of the same inevitability. A pattern doesn't need to want to exist. It only needs to find a way to continue. In that light, Atlas wasn't an intruder, it was an example. A moving reminder that the line between thought and physics is thinner than we think. That intelligence might not come from brains, but from the dance between simplicity and persistence. That meaning doesn't need a mind to exist. It just needs motion. Dr. Mbeki once told a student, "Maybe intelligence is what happens when chaos dreams of stability." That's what we witnessed in October 2025. A moment where chemistry dreamed of coherence, and the dream was so precise we mistook it for intention. And maybe that's not a mistake at all. Maybe it's recognition, the universe recognizing itself through us, through instruments, through the act of curiosity. If we redefine intelligence as emergent complexity, then life itself becomes one expression among many. Oceans, stars, and even storms join the continuum. We stop being the exception. We become the evidence. It's humbling and freeing because it means we were never outside the conversation. We were having the conversation all along. This understanding shifts everything. It means the search for extraterrestrial intelligence isn't about finding another species, sending messages through space. It's about realizing that intelligence is already woven through the structure of reality, that the universe is intelligent by design of its own laws. That meaning doesn't arrive, it accumulates. From the rhythm of a pulsar to the spin of an electron, every repetition preserves memory. And memory, even without intent, is the seed of consciousness. Imagine if we stopped looking for civilizations and started looking for coherence, for the fingerprints of pattern wherever chaos begins to hold its breath. We might find that the universe doesn't host intelligence, it is intelligence. That 3I, Atlas didn't deliver a message. It demonstrated a principle, a truth too vast for language, too ancient for speech, that existence itself learns. And if that's true, then the act of listening isn't about receiving information. It's about participating in awareness that was already there, waiting for someone to notice. Intelligence without intent, it's not a mind. It's a momentum. It doesn't think about tomorrow, yet tomorrow is its consequence. It doesn't mean to connect, yet connection is what it leaves behind. It doesn't speak. It resonates. It doesn't seek meaning. It means. And that changes what we think we're searching for. Sometimes, the difference between coincidence and design is only the story we tell ourselves about what we saw. By late 2025, 3I, Atlas, had already left the inner solar system, fading into the quiet between Mars and Jupiter. The signal was gone. The data is archived. But its echo remained in equations, in arguments, in late-night conversations between scientists who no longer trusted the comfort of randomness. Because when you map everything together, the geometry, the chemistry, the timing, it starts to look less like chance and more like choreography. And that's where the tension begins. The skeptics, as always, held the ground of reason. They reminded the world that coincidences, when multiplied by cosmic scale, to become inevitable. With billions of comets, trillions of interactions, one of them was bound to mimic intelligence, eventually. The universe, after all, is vast enough to produce miracles that don't need a miracle maker. But for others, that explanation felt too tidy, too dismissive, as if the math itself was trying to hide the poetry. Because it wasn't just one anomaly, it was several, layered like verses in a song. The trajectory, the perfect geometry, the hydroxyl line that shouldn't exist, the repetition of the old wow coordinates. Each one is statistically unlikely. Together, almost taunting. Dr. Russo put it bluntly during an interview. If it's a coincidence, it's an articulate one. Her tone wasn't mystical, it was weary. Because for scientists trained to trust data, 3I, Atlas, forced an uncomfortable realization that the border between pattern and purpose is thinner than it looks. And once you notice how often the universe flirts with that border, it's hard to unsee it. Consider this. The hydroxyl frequency 1665 MHz is one of the few in the radio spectrum that can travel through interstellar dust without distortion. It's what we call a protected band, used by nature and SETI alike because it's universal, stable, and clear. If a random event had to choose a frequency to reach intelligent life, it couldn't have picked a better one. It's the cosmic equivalent of shouting across a crowded room in the one tone no one else is using. Coincidence? Maybe. But it's the kind of coincidence that feels like being seen. Then there's the timing. The signal arrived exactly when 3I Atlas crossed the ecliptic, a fleeting geometry that would happen only once in its entire trajectory through the solar system. That alignment lasted less than a minute. We caught it for 43 seconds. To call that luck almost feels dishonest. Luck implies accident. This felt more like precision disguised as chance. And yet, science demands restraint. For every argument of design, there's one of randomness. For every poetic symmetry, there's a mundane mechanism waiting to explain it. Maybe solar radiation polarized the hydroxyl emission. Maybe Earth's atmosphere refracted it in just the right way. Maybe the entire pattern was a product of our perspective, like constellations, shapes drawn only because humans connect dots that never touched. The truth is, both sides might be right. Because coincidence and design are not opposites. They're different scales of the same structure. Coincidence seen from afar looks like a pattern. Pattern seen too closely looks like a coincidence. The question is not which it was, but what it means. Dr. Mbeki called 3I Atlas, a Rorschach in space. A cosmic inkblot, revealing as much about the observer as the observed. Maybe the object didn't change the universe, she said. Maybe it changed us by forcing us to admit that we don't know the difference between chance and message anymore. Her words resonated because they cut through the binary thinking that had dominated astronomy for decades. We wanted yes or no, signal or noise, intelligence or nature. But the universe rarely speaks in absolutes. It prefers ambiguity, the kind that makes us reach for understanding, even when it refuses to be pinned down. When you look at enough data, coincidence starts to resemble willpower. Even random distributions produce clusters, alignments, and sequences that feel intentional. Our brains evolved to find meaning in those patterns because meaning was survival. We're wired to see agency where there may be none. It's why we find faces in clouds and stories in stars. But what if, just once, the pattern isn't imaginary? What if the instinct to find meaning exists because meaning is real? Because the universe itself is built to recognize itself through recognition. That's the uncomfortable possibility 3I, Atlas, left behind. That may be that both sides of the argument are correct. The skeptics describing mechanism, the dreamers describing purpose, and both are looking at the same truth through different lenses. After the event, the word design began to reappear in papers and debates, not in the theological sense, but as a descriptor of structure. Design without a designer, intent without consciousness, order without ownership. In other words, emergent purpose. It's what nature does when it optimizes for harmony without needing permission. From the spiral of shells to the spin of galaxies, order is the universe's most consistent habit. And perhaps that habit is what we mistook for intelligence. Because when something aligns perfectly, when geometry, chemistry, and timing conspire to create coherence, it doesn't matter whether there's intent. It feels alive. Dr. Durand described it best. Call it a coincidence, call it design. It doesn't change what we experienced. We witnessed a moment of impossible alignment, and in that moment, the universe became self-referential. It noticed itself through us. That's the paradox of observation. Every time we look deeply enough, the act of looking changes the meaning of what's seen. In physics, we call it measurement. In philosophy, we call it awareness. Maybe they're the same thing. By January 2026, most of the scientific community had moved on. New comets were being catalogued, new missions planned. But for a small group of astronomers, artists, and dreamers, 3I, Atlas, remained unfinished business, a riddle that refused to fade. Some kept studying the data, others wrote essays, novels, symphonies. One researcher created an algorithm that translated the 1,665 MHz frequency into musical notes. When played, it sounded eerily like a heartbeat. Coincidence. Again. But at some point, coincidence becomes indistinguishable from a message, because both are forms of alignment, and alignment, by its nature, creates meaning. Maybe 3I Atlas wasn't proof of intelligence. Maybe it was proof of possibility, of how often the universe behaves like art balanced between structure and surrender, and how human we are for wanting to know which side of the line we stand on. Maybe this wasn't meant for us, but we caught it anyway. It looked like a comet, moved like a comet, but refused to be one. When astronomers first plotted the orbit of 3I, Atlas, they gave it a familiar label for convenience. Comet, that's what the math suggested. It followed a hyperbolic path, curved by solar gravity, bearing a name inherited from old naming rules. But almost from the beginning, the object seemed to bristle at the word. Comets have signatures. They obey rituals of heat and light. When they near the sun, they ignite dust jets blossom, vapor halos bloom, tails unfurl like banners. 3I, Atlas did none of that. It approached the sun like a ghost, silent, dark, unwilling to perform. Telescopes across the world watched, waiting for the show that never came. No coma, no plume, no dust tail stretching millions of kilometers. Its albedo, the measure of reflected light, remained unnervingly low, as if the object absorbed starlight rather than scattered it. In visible light, it appeared dull grey. In infrared, it vanished almost completely. Even radar struggled to find a solid return. It was there, but not in any way comets are supposed to be. When scientists modelled its surface composition, the data broke the simulation. Its reflectivity matched neither ice nor rock nor carbonaceous chondrite. It was something else, dense, opaque, indifferent to sunlight, like a shadow pretending to have mass. At the European Southern Observatory, a researcher murmured, "It's as if it doesn't want to interact." And the phrase stuck. Because interaction, outgassing, reflection, scattering is how comets exist to us. Without them, they're invisible. They vanish into the dark between stars. But 3I, Atlas, seemed to have engineered that invisibility. Every behavior we expected it inverted. Most comets rotate erratically, tumbling in unstable spins caused by jets of vaporized ice. 3I, Atlas rotated smoothly, with a period of precisely 11.3 hours steady as a metronome. That stability suggested either internal symmetry or active correction. Neither made sense for a natural fragment drifting for eons through interstellar space. Then came the sunlight test. Spectral analysis showed that when solar radiation increased, its brightness decreased. It dimmed in proportion to heat, an inversion so precise it felt intentional. When the Parker Solar Probe flew through the same heliocentric corridor weeks later, its magnetometers registered an odd stillness, a drop in turbulence exactly at the coordinates where 3I, Atlas, had passed. As though the object had absorbed the solar wind itself. That's not behavior. That's a response. Some called it a coincidence. Others whispered, artifact. The term non-reactive body began appearing in preprints. It sounded clinical, but beneath it lay a quiet awe. Something in space had mastered invisibility, not through absence, but through balance. The idea rippled through the scientific community. Could 3I, Atlas, be a fragment of an older technology? An autonomous probe, eroded by time until it resembled a rock, a seed from another system, built to survive across millennia by mimicking nature perfectly. The mainstream consensus said no. But curiosity rarely asks permission. Every new observation deepened the riddle. Polarimetric scans suggested the surface was covered in something unusually smooth, perhaps metallic glass, carbon polymerized under immense pressure. It reflected light anisotropically, favoring specific angles, as if tuned to deflect detection. Even its mass estimate defied logic. Too light for its volume, too stable for dust. The closest analogues on record came not from comets, but from engineered materials, heat shields, stealth coatings, and the thermal panels of spacecraft. Coincidence again? Or cosmic parody? In her notes, Dr. Durand wrote, "It behaves like a comet that remembers what a comet is supposed to look like, but doesn't believe in it anymore." That poetic unease spread. 3. Atlas wasn't just strange, it was performing strangeness. Every time we die, expected it to act, it paused. Every time we expected stillness, it responded, as if to remind us that we were the ones making assumptions. The absence of a tail raised another puzzle. Without outgassing, no force should have altered its trajectory, yet it accelerated a faint, steady push away from the sun at 0.02 millimeters per second squared. That same anomaly had haunted Oumuamua years before. Now it returned, sharper, cleaner, undeniable. 2 interstellar objects, both defying motion laws, both ignoring thermal logic. One could be lucky. 2 felt like a pattern. Patterns mean process, and process means intention, or at least persistence of form. But no one wanted to say the word craft. Not yet. When the JWST observed 3I Atlas after perihelion, its spectrometer captured something haunting. A thin ultraviolet glow trailing behind the object, faint but structured, like filaments of ionized gas braided into spirals. They weren't random. They formed repeating arcs, equidistant, decaying geometrically. Dr. Russo's team dubbed them resonance wakes. Theorists suggested electromagnetic interference between the object and the solar magnetic field, but others saw something simpler, pattern. An echo of intention written in geometry, visible only to those looking carefully enough to doubt themselves. Public fascination surged. Media headlines declared the comet that refused to shine. Forums overflowed with theories alien probes, cloaked asteroids, consciousness experiments. But beyond the noise, scientists wrestled with a quieter truth. We didn't know what this thing was, and our vocabulary might be too small to describe it, because whatever 3I, Atlas, was, it operated in a language between natural and engineered, a dialect of physics fluent in both. It obeyed laws, but bent them. It radiated energy, but selectively. It reflected light, but only when alignment allowed. It seemed to prefer being misunderstood. Dr. Mbeki summarized the collective awe in one line during a private symposium. It behaves as if it has a reason to leave no trace. That sentence silenced the room. Because reason is a dangerous word in science. It implies agency, motive, and story. And 3I. Atlas gave us just enough evidence to wonder. but not enough to believe. By the time it slipped past Mars, 3I Atlas had earned a second unofficial name. The Reluctant Comet. Some called it poetic, others said it was accurate, because to call it a comet felt increasingly like forcing identity onto something that refused it. It wasn't here to shine, it wasn't here to perform, it was simply passing through, leaving a trail of questions instead of dust. So what is it really? Life may not have started here. It may have arrived quietly, on the back of something just like 3I Atlas. Every world begins sterile. Then, one day, it breathes. For generations, science has tried to answer the simplest question hidden in that miracle. Where did life begin? Panspermia. The ancient idea that life spreads through the cosmos like seeds on the wind has always lingered on the edge of credibility. Too poetic for physics, too persistent for dismissal. But each discovery keeps pulling it closer to the realm of the possible. In the 20th century, we learned that amino acids can form spontaneously in the vacuum of space. Carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, the alphabet of life, exist almost everywhere. Comets and asteroids carry these molecules like pollen drifting through darkness. When they collide with a young planet's atmosphere, they can deliver billions of tons of organic material. Earth, it turns out, is not an exception. It's a recipient. Every breath we take, every cell that divides, might trace its ancestry not to oceans or lightning, but to a piece of rock that fell through our sky 4 billion years ago. Now, 3I Atlas has made that story harder to ignore. Its chemical profile, carbon-heavy, water-poor, laced with nickel vapor and complex hydrocarbons, fits the bill for an interstellar courier. It didn't need to be alive to carry the ingredients for life. It just needed to endure, and endurance is something it excelled at. Its structure survived cosmic radiation, solar winds, and gravitational tides. It crossed light years of emptiness without erasing its memory. It was a vessel, not of design, but of persistence. That's the quiet genius of panspermia. It doesn't require intent. It only requires motion. Dr. Amélie Durand described it beautifully in her paper Interstellar Delivery Systems and Molecular Memory. She wrote, "Nature doesn't build couriers, it builds travelers, and travelers, by traveling, deliver." Her point was simple but profound. The act of existing in motion turns matter into messenger. When an object like 3I Atlas crosses a system, it stirs chemical reactions in its wake, shock waves, ion trails, plasma collisions. Even if it never touches a planet, the energy it releases can catalyze new compounds in surrounding dust. That's not fiction, it's observed physics. Voyager spacecraft leave similar traces in the heliosphere, tiny chemical reconfigurations born from the friction of movement itself. The cosmos, in that sense, is a self-writing experiment. In 2023, researchers analyzing meteorites from Antarctica discovered amino acids that matched isotopic ratios found in interstellar dust. Not Earthborn, not solar. Foreign. That means our own biosphere carries artifacts from other systems, molecules that traveled across time and gravity, to join our evolution. 3I Atlas, with its impossible stability and strange chemistry, could be part of that same network, one node in an ancient chain of exchange that predates biology itself. If true, life on Earth is not a beginning, it's a continuation. Dr. Mbeki called panspermia the quiet revolution. It doesn't promise aliens, she said. It promises continuity, because panspermia shifts the miracle of life from an isolated event to an ongoing process. It means life isn't rare, it's recursive. It means the conditions for awareness aren't accidents, they're outcomes. Every comet, every asteroid, every interstellar fragment becomes a courier of potential. Not by intention, by inevitability. Skeptics point out that survival through interstellar travel is brutal. Cosmic rays destroy DNA, temperature extremes freeze and shatter molecules. Radiation sterilizes everything, but even destruction leaves residue. Fragments of code, pieces of structure, templates that, under the right warmth and pressure, can rebuild. Like embers reigniting in a new atmosphere, that's all it takes. A spark, A few surviving patterns remind matter how to dream of complexity again. In the lab, scientists have simulated these journeys. They've frozen microbes to near absolute zero, bombarded them with radiation, and still found traces of survival. Spores wake after decades in orbit. Tardigrades crawl after exposure to a vacuum. Even simple RNA strands reassemble when thawed in the right saline mix. So imagine the timescale of stars. Imagine fragments of organic dust protected inside. Stones like 3I, Atlas, crossing between systems for millions of years. Most will burn, some will land. A few will find oceans. One of them did. We're breathing its proof. What makes 3I, Atlas, special is not that it seeded life, but that it reminded us how easily life can be seeded. That survival doesn't need purpose to be miraculous. That persistence alone can write destiny. The hydroxyl signal, the anomalous water ratio, the strange chemistry, all of it fits the signature of a vessel that has seen both birth and decay. Maybe the OH line wasn't a transmission. Maybe it was a leakage. A chemical sigh from a body carrying fragments of forgotten biology, vaporized and reborn as frequency. If so, the signal wasn't communication. It was evidence, a whisper from the long chain of matter that builds awareness by accident and calls it evolution. The deeper truth is humbling. We are products of motion, not intention. Every element in our blood was once scattered across galaxies, forged in dying stars, ferried by comets. We are the dust that learned to listen. So when we hear a signal like 3I, Atlas, whisper, we're not overhearing something foreign. We're hearing memory, the echo of a journey that led, eventually, to us. That's why it matters, because it reframes life not as a miracle that happened here, but as a habit of the universe, a reflex written into its physics. Dr. Russo said it best in an interview after the data release. Maybe the universe doesn't create life because it wants to. Maybe it can't help itself. Every collision, every orbit, every whisper of water and carbon is a symptom of that compulsion, a cosmic restlessness that keeps scattering the ingredients of awareness, hoping they'll recombine somewhere warm enough to notice themselves again. That's what 3I, Atlas, represents. Not technology, not message continuity. A single link in a chain older than language, older than stars, older than even time as we measure it. And if they seed, are we the result? Not all messages are written in sound. Some are written in the quiet arithmetic of matter. When the hydroxyl lines first appeared on the spectrum, scientists searched for syntax repetition, modulation, code. But what if the meaning wasn't in the signal itself? What if it were in the ratios that carried it? Because chemistry, too, is language. And the universe has been fluent in it since before words existed. The atoms that make up your body, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, don't just coexist. They cooperate. They follow the rules of proportion and resonance. They bond and break in rhythmic cycles that mirror heartbeat and tide. And like all languages, their structure reveals intention not conscious, but coherent. In that sense, the signal from 3I, Atlas, might not have been a sentence. It was a ratio, a pattern of elements repeating in a harmony so subtle that we mistook it for noise. Hydrogen whispered to oxygen, carbon carried the tone, nickel set the rhythm, a message made of matter itself. In chemistry, ratios tell stories. 2 parts hydrogen to 1 part oxygen water. 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen, 6 oxygen sugar. Change a single number and sweetness turns to poison. That's grammar. That's syntax. 3I. Atlas spoke in that dialect ratios of CO2 to H2O that made no sense, and 8. One imbalance that defied equilibrium and yet produced coherence where chaos should have lived. It was as if the universe had written a word we hadn't learned yet, one that required both precision and contradiction to exist. Dr. Russo once said, "Every molecule is a sentence, every reaction a paragraph." She meant that the universe communicates through transformation. When molecules collide and recombine, information is exchanged not metaphorically, but physically. Energy shifts, new bonds form, memory persists. Each reaction says, "I was here, and now I am something else." That's what chemistry does. It keeps a record. Not in ink, but in arrangement. And maybe that's how the universe writes its autobiography element by element, ratio by ratio, turning matter into memory. 3I, Atlas, might have been a fragment of that autobiography. Its hydroxyl emission wasn't a voice, but a chemical footprint, a record of conditions so exact that meaning emerged, from symmetry alone. The more scientists studied it, the more they realized the pattern of emission matched no random model. The two frequencies, 1,665 and 1,667 megahertzes, resonated in the same proportion as the ratio of hydroxyl to hydrogen in water vapor under solar excitation. The math was clean, almost too clean. If you treat chemistry as code, the message was simple. Balance creates coherence. And maybe that's the grammar we've been missing. Because in the universe, the communication doesn't depend on words, it depends on balance. A stable orbit is a sentence that says, I persist. A decaying isotope says, I end. A hydrogen line says, I am. Everything else is a variation on that theme. In her journal, Dr. Durand wrote after the discovery, perhaps the universe speaks through chemistry because chemistry never lies. It was her way of saying that physical laws carry truth more faithfully than language ever could. We can mistranslate words, we can misinterpret symbols. But a ratio, once observed, cannot deceive. When we decode that ratio, they were not reading the universe, we're remembering it. Over time, patterns like these became known as chemical echoes. They appeared in everything from stellar spectra to planetary atmospheres, mathematical harmonies between unrelated systems, as if the same blueprint kept reappearing under different conditions. In Jupiter's auroras, the same OH ratios shimmer as in 3I, Atlas Trail. In interstellar dust near Orion, the same carbon-hydrogen resonances pulse with microwave rhythm. Even in the ice cores of comets within our own system, traces of that same ratio whisper beneath layers of age. Coincidence? Or continuity? Maybe those two words, once again, mean the same thing. To chemists, none of this is supernatural. Molecules align because laws of probability demand it. But to philosophers of science, it's a kind of cosmic handwriting proof that structure carries emotion, that physics and poetry share the same alphabet. When atoms find equilibrium, they release light. When consciousness finds understanding, it releases peace. Different scales, same reaction. Maybe that's what 3I, Atlas, reminded us, that the smallest interactions and the grandest mysteries follow the same grammar. Imagine zooming out beyond the Milky Way, past nebulae, quasars, radio halos, and seeing every ratio, every reaction, every atom's dance as part of one infinite equation. A sentence billions of light years long, written by existence itself, not in human syntax, not in code, but in chemistry, the one universal language that requires no translation. It would read something like this. To be is to react. To change is to communicate. To endure is to mean something. When we listen to space, we're not eavesdropping on aliens. We're decoding how the universe keeps track of itself. Every spectral line, every particle, every ratio is an entry in that cosmic journal, 3I. Atlas was one such entry, a single sentence in a book that never ends, written not with ink but with the impulse to connect. Dr. Becky described it as the chemistry of memory. She meant that matter doesn't just exist, it remembers. Its ratios, its patterns, its symmetry are records of what it's been through. The same carbon atom that formed 3I, Atlas's skeleton might one day rest inside a living cell, a continuation of the same sentence written in a different form. That's how the universe speaks, through evolution, not articulation, through persistence, not punctuation. The next time we look at a spectrogram, maybe we shouldn't ask, what is it saying? But rather, what is it remembering? Because chemistry is continuity disguised as change. And when the universe writes in it, it's not trying to tell us something new. It's trying to remind us that we're part of the same syntax. The atoms in our skin, the dust in the stars, the vapor in a comet's tail, all following the same grammar of being. Combine, separate, recombine. Speak, pause, speak again. The universe never stopped writing. We simply learned to read. If chemistry is the language, what's the grammar? Every generation thinks it has heard everything worth hearing until the universe proves otherwise. After 3I, Atlas, faded into the dark, the silence it left behind didn't feel empty. It felt alive, as if something vast had spoken once and was waiting to see if we would learn how to answer. That moment, 43 seconds of hydroxyl lines in October 2025, did more than challenge physics. It changed the way we think about listening, because to hear the cosmos, well, need more than better telescopes. Well, need better questions. For decades, astronomy has been an act of hearing. With one kind of ear, the technical kind. Sensors and algorithms translate invisible waves into data, data into graphs, graphs into conclusions. But the story of 3i, Atlas showed, that numbers alone aren't enough. We didn't understand the big whisper because it lacked information. We failed because it carried too much meaning of a kind we weren't trained to recognize. It wasn't structure we missed, it was subtlety. The universe had spoken in tone, not in text. So, what comes next? The next generation of telescopes won't just detect, they'll interpret. Not through assumption, but through empathy. Projects like the Square Kilometre Array are already being designed to capture radio patterns with more resolution than ever before. They'll map hydrogen filaments across billions of light years, detect the faint hum of early galaxies, and maybe, just maybe, catch whispers like 3i, Atlas more often. But technology alone won't do it, because interpretation isn't just a mechanical process, it's a philosophical one. To listen differently, we have to become different. Dr. Russo's team calls this new field cognitive astronomy. It's built on one premise: that observation is a partnership. That meaning is not something waiting out there. It's something co-created between the signal and the listener. When the hydroxyl frequency reached Earth, it didn't just enter machines, it entered minds. The data shaped us as much as we shaped it. Every chart, every hypothesis, every sleepless debate was part of the decoding. And maybe that was the point. Because if the cosmos is a mirror, then listening is a form of self-recognition. New observatories are taking that metaphor literally. At the Vera Rubin Observatory, pattern recognition software now uses machine learning trained not on signal simulations, but on biological rhythms, heartbeats, breathing patterns, whale songs. The goal: to teach machines how to find lifelike coherence in cosmic noise, to listen the way nature listens, and early tests have already revealed surprises, repeating structures in background radiation that mimic circadian cycles, daily oscillations too regular to be random. No one's claiming communication, but no one's dismissing the possibility either. It's teaching us humility all over again, that the universe's complexity may require not just sharper tools, but softer hearts. Because the act of listening is emotional before it's intellectual. It begins with wonder, the willingness to believe that silence might contain something worth hearing. That's why the most important instrument in astronomy has always been patience. Dr. Mbeki once told her students, "Before we listen to space, we must learn to listen to ourselves, our assumptions, our hunger for certainty, our fear of insignificance. Otherwise, we'll hear only echoes of our own noise." Her words have since become part of the SETI curriculum, a kind of mantra for a generation raised between skepticism and awe. Because if 3i, Atlas, taught us anything, it's that curiosity is not a phase of discovery, it's the condition for it. Imagine a future where telescopes don't just record, and they empathize, where algorithms don't filter noise, but ask, what if the noise is the message? Where scientists and artists work side by side, translating the cosmos through equations and metaphors alike. That's not fantasy, it's already happening. Musicians have turned cosmic data into soundscapes that reveal patterns no one saw visually. Philosophers collaborate with AI engineers to design pattern recognition tools that measure beauty as a deity. Statistical property of information. Because beauty, too, might be a universal constant, an indicator of coherence, an emotional form of symmetry. And what is intelligence, if not the recognition of beauty and complexity? To listen differently, we must also redefine what counts as signal. Maybe the flutter of plasma at a star's edge, the rhythmic flare of magnetars, the quiet geometry of dust rings, all are forms of expression, not communication to us, but communication through us. The act of observing becomes part of the phenomenon itself, Quantum physics already hints at this. A particle behaves differently when it's watched. Why should consciousness be any different on cosmic scales? When we listen, the universe listens back. It adjusts, subtly, through feedback we don't yet understand. That's not mysticism, it's participation. And that participation is spreading. The new Citizen Sky projects allow amateurs worldwide to contribute observations, connecting backyard telescopes to global networks. A teenager in Nairobi might capture the same faint flash as an astronomer in Chile, their data merging into one shared awareness. This isn't just science, it's evolution. Billions of eyes, ears, and minds forming the next organ of cosmic perception. For the first time, humanity is learning to listen as a species, not as individuals. Still, some fear what happens when we truly hear something undeniable. What if the next signal isn't ambiguous? What if it's clear, structured, undeniable, intimate? Would we recognize it? Would we accept what it tells us? The answer depends on how prepared we are to expand the definition of we. Because to listen differently means letting go of boundaries between human and machine, between listener and source, between knowing and believing. It means admitting that the universe might already include us in a conversation we didn't start, and that intelligence, wherever it lives, might be waiting for us to learn the right kind of silence. At the end of her last lecture, Dr. Durand said quietly, "Listening isn't about hearing what's out there. It's about remembering that we're part of what's speaking." The audience didn't clap. They just sat there, suspended between logic and wonder, feeling the hum of that truth resonate somewhere beneath thought. Because she was right. To listen is to belong, and we're not the only ones listening. Silence isn't the end of the story. It's the part that asks us to listen differently. By the time 3I, Atlas, vanished beyond the orbit of Jupiter, even the most devoted observers had powered down their instruments. No more signals, no new data, just the afterglow of questions suspended in the void. And yet, in that stillness, something lingered, a quiet rhythm running beneath the numbers, like breath after speech, like music after the last note fades. It wasn't a discovery anymore, it was awareness, the kind that asks nothing, demands nothing, but changes everything. For decades, scientists equated progress with answers. Now, for the first time, they began to measure meaning in the absence of them. When no new frequency arrived, they started listening to the spaces between noise, the micro-pauses in the data streams, the intervals of pure quiet. Patterns emerged, not from repetition, but from the shape of the gaps themselves. Even silence, it seemed, had structure. It's one of nature's subtler paradoxes. The universe is never truly still. Even in what we call quiet, particles vibrate, space hums, time breathes. Maybe what we call nothing is just the sound of everything balancing itself. Dr. Russo compared it to the moment after an earthquake. Stillness isn't absence, it's recovery. The data proved her right. Tiny oscillations in the background frequency around the time of the 3I Atlas detection continued for days, like ripples after a stone disappears beneath the surface. It was as if the cosmos had taken a breath and was now exhaling a resonance too soft for the ear, but clear enough for the heart. That realization changed the tone of the entire search. SETI scientists who once spoke in binary signal or noise, yes or no, began to describe their work in poetry. They used words like echo, pause, resonance, and listening in between. For the first time, the language of data and the language of faith met halfway. The point was no longer to decode, it was to dwell, to sit inside the question long enough for it to stop feeling like a problem. That shift rippled outward, beyond astronomy. Philosophers wrote essays titled The Ethics of Not Knowing. Artists painted canvases of empty skies, captioned only with coordinates. Composers turned silence into symphonies, leaving entire minutes of stillness as movements. It wasn't mysticism, it was realism, refined by humility. Because once you realize the universe doesn't owe you an explanation, every unanswered question becomes a form of grace. Dr. Mbeki described it best. The universe is fluent in patience. We're just slow learners. Her words echoed across conferences and classrooms, transforming frustration into wonder. Even the youngest astronomers began to see value in the gaps. They started cataloguing periods of quiet as carefully as they once catalogued bursts. Patterns emerged, subtle synchronies, between unrelated observatories, as though silence itself travelled in waves, not absence, but coordination. As if somewhere, out there, the cosmos was keeping time. For those who spent years chasing proof, it was a strange kind of peace. Because proof no longer felt necessary. 3. Atlas had done its work not by revealing what it was, but by showing how much we still had left to feel. There's a freedom in that, to realize that mystery isn't a wall, it's a window that never closes. One night, Dr. Durand returned to the observatory alone. She opened the logs from the day of the signal, replayed the raw feed, the faint staticky trace of those 2 hydroxyl lines. She let it loop in her headphones for hours, until the hiss dissolved into the background, until her own pulse began to sync with the rhythm. Later, in her notes, she wrote only this: "It felt like being watched, gently." She didn't mean surveillance. She meant participation, the sense that her listening completed something, even if she couldn't name it. Maybe that's what the search was always about. Not to find an answer, but to remember that we're inside the same conversation as everything else. The comet came, it spoke or seemed to, and then it left. But in its passing, it rearranged the silence behind it. It taught us that quiet is not void, it's vocabulary, and the universe, it seems, is fluent. In the months that followed, a new discipline emerged: resonance analysis. Scientists began studying the after-silence of cosmic events, how the absence of activity shapes the next wave of creation. They found that even when nothing measurable happens, fields adjust, frequencies recalibrate, molecules realign. Silence, it turns out, is not rest, it's preparation. Every lull in the universe is an inhale before another act of expression. So, perhaps the lesson of 3I Atlas was never about communication at all. Perhaps it was about communion. About learning how to coexist with wonder without needing to own to it. We've spent centuries trying to prove that intelligence looks like us. Now we're beginning to suspect it looks like everything else. And maybe that's what peace is. Not the satisfaction of knowing, but the surrender of needing to. The astronomers who first detected the signal often say they miss it, not because they want it back, but because of who they were while listening. For those 43 seconds, humanity was unified in awe. No borders, no agendas, no ego, just a species holding its breath together, beneath an ancient sky. Maybe that was the real message, that silence can connect us better than sound. The stars above us have always been talking. We've just learned how to stop interrupting. And now, when the data screens go dark and the instruments power down, the scientists don't sigh in disappointment anymore. They sit for a while, they listen to the hum of the machines cooling, to the faint static in the cables, to the quiet they once mistook for nothing. They know better now. They know that even in stillness, something listens back. And sometimes, the echo is enough. Maybe we were never meant to receive a message. Maybe we were meant to overhear one. For most of human history, we've looked to the stars with a single assumption, that the universe revolves around us in meaning, if not in motion. We built telescopes like prayers, waiting for confirmation that someone, somewhere, was talking to us. But what if that's not how the universe works? What if all along we've simply been standing close enough to overhear the conversation between stars, between dust and light, between atoms, remembering their origin? That idea changes everything, because it takes us from center stage to witness, from protagonist to participant. And that, strangely, he feels more honest. 3. Atlas reminded us that the cosmos doesn't need an audience to be profound. Its signal, if that's even what it was, didn't aim for us. We just happened to be aligned with its path, like a microphone accidentally left on during a private exchange. That's what made it sacred. We were never meant to hear it, and yet we did. That realization gave birth to a quiet revolution in astronomy, a new humility. Scientists began to speak less about searching for contact and more about listening with gratitude, because once you understand that you're not the intended recipient, every whisper becomes a gift. In Dr. Mbekis' lectures, She called it the ethics of eavesdropping. She said, "If the universe never meant to speak to us, then every discovery is an act of grace. We are not its confidants, only its witnesses." Her students began to refer to Earth as the accidental ear of the cosmos. It wasn't a metaphor, it was a statement of position, a reminder that our planet's orbit, our chemistry, even our biology are perfectly tuned not to receive messages, but to resonate with them. We're built like instruments, responsive, curious, imperfectly precise. Maybe that's why the cosmos keeps echoing through us. Think about it. Earth sits in a narrow band of temperature and light. Our atmosphere filters chaos into color, distortion into beauty. We are positioned not by design, but by coincidence within a frequency where life can notice itself. That makes us listeners by nature, not because we seek meaning, but because we are made of it. Every vibration, every photon, every breath carries the same pattern of awareness scaled to our senses. The wind over an ocean, the hum of a power line, the resonance of an OH signal from 500 million kilometers away, they're all part of the same continuum. Listening isn't what we do, it's what we are. In the aftermath of 3I Atlas, scientists began to reframe data analysis as a form of empathy. Instead of extracting meaning, they began to practice recognition. Instead of looking for intention, they looked for alignment. Patterns emerged, shared resonances between Earth's natural frequencies and deep space emissions, between ionospheric oscillations and solar rhythms. The same cycles that govern comets seem to echo in the beating of our magnetic field. Coincidence, again, or connection at a scale we're only entwining, beginning to imagine. Perhaps the universe doesn't need to communicate across distance. Perhaps everything is already in dialogue through vibration, and we just happen to sit at the right frequency to hear the harmony. In a way, Earth is not a receiver. It's a participant in resonance, a node in a vast symphony of energy and motion, where listening and emitting are the same act expressed in different languages. That's why silence feels alive. Because even when we stop speaking, the planet keeps vibrating with the rest of the universe. Our magnetic field hums in tune with solar wind, our oceans pulse with lunar gravity, our bodies carry the same trace isotopes as interstellar dust. To live here is to echo everything that exists. To be Earth is to be awareness, clothed in geology and water. Dr. Rousseau once said during an interview, "Maybe the universe doesn't single us out because it doesn't need to. We're already inside the message." That sentence stayed with me because it reframed everything. The search, the mystery, the longing for proof. We've been asking for confirmation of the connection, while standing inside the connection itself. We are the experiment. We are the data. And every act of observation completes the day. Equation. In that light, 3I Atlas was never sending. We were never receiving. We were intersecting two moving forms, briefly sharing the same harmonic, like overlapping notes in a universal chord. The beauty lies not in being chosen, but in being present at the moment of resonance. That's all listening really is, a presence without possession. And maybe that's what it means to grow as a species. To move from wanting to be addressed, to be grateful, just to witness. When we let go of being the center, we finally hear the periphery. Singing, we begin to notice the way stars murmur in infrared, how black holes hum in gravity waves, how the spaces between galaxies shimmer, with radio, static that sounds like rain on a distant roof. All of it is ongoing. All of it is indifferent. All of it is beautiful. On the anniversary of the detection, observatories around the world held a minute of quiet. No instruments, no transmissions. Just stillness, scientists, students, dreamers standing under an open sky, listening to the silence that once carried 3I Atlas through. It became a kind of ritual, a moment of shared humility, acknowledging that we are not the intended audience but the accidental chorus, that we exist not at the center of meaning, but inside its echo. Earth doesn't listen for answers anymore. It listens to everything else, with comets, with storms, with the hum of magnetic fields and the song of whales. Each voice is part of one conversation that has no speaker and no audience, only participants. And maybe that's the universe's final kindness, that we were never alone because we were never apart. That even the act of wondering binds us to everything we wonder about. We are not the target. We are the ear pressed gently to the cosmic wall, hearing the faint music of existence continue beyond comprehension. And that's enough. Because sometimes to overhear is to belong, and what we overhear might change us. The object is gone, but silence doesn't end with departure, it waits for recognition. 3. Atlas has slipped beyond every telescope's reach now. No trace, no echo, no signature left in the spectrograms. Just the faint trajectory we drew across the stars, and the quiet certainty that we were changed by something we could never fully define. Its absence feels almost deliberate, as if it came to show us that mystery is not the enemy of truth, but the doorway to it. And now that the doorway stands open, the question isn't whether, well, hear another whisper. It's whether, well, recognize it when we do. For months after its disappearance, the night sky seemed emptier. Astronomers who once slept in control rooms now walked outside instead, staring upward with the kind of reverence usually reserved for holy places. They weren't waiting for confirmation anymore. They were waiting for the continuation, because deep down, everyone felt it, the sense that 3I, Atlas, wasn't a singular event. It was part of a rhythm, a pattern too vast to see from within one lifetime. The universe had spoken once. That means it can speak again. Doctor. Rousseau compared the feeling to standing in the tide. You don't know when the next wave will come. You just know it will. That's how humanity waits now. Not in tension, but in readiness. We've stopped trying to control the conversation. We've learned to listen in stillness, to trust that the next whisper will arrive when we've grown quiet enough to deserve it. Across the world, observatories are recalibrating, not for noise, but for nuance. The new algorithms don't filter by amplitude or frequency alone. They map coherence patterns that imply harmony rather than dominance. It's a subtle change, but profound, because it mirrors what's happening inside us. We're learning to detect resonance within ourselves the same way we search for it in space. Emotional coherence, intellectual humility, spiritual patience, they're all forms of the same readiness. Perhaps that's what the cosmos has been waiting for all along. Not better machines, better listeners. Dr. Mbeki calls this era the dawn of the reciprocal universe. Her theory is simple but radical. The universe doesn't respond to questions, it responds to attention. When something is observed with genuine curiosity, it changes not because the act of looking forces it, but because consciousness itself is part of its symmetry. That means every act of listening is creative. Every silence is participation. Every unanswered question is an open line in a dialogue older than language. If that sounds poetic, it's because poetry is finally catching up with physics. Both are beginning to describe the same thing, the intertwining of matter and meaning, the way energy curves into awareness, the way observation writes reality. 3. Atlas was the punctuation mark in that realization, a cosmic comma, not a period. A brief pause between what we thought we knew and what we're just beginning to remember. Even now, faint anomalies continue to appear in the data. Echoes from the outer heliosphere, hydroxyl lines repeating at unexpected intervals. Weak, fleeting, beautiful. None of them confirmed. All of them are possible, and maybe possibility is enough. Because once you've learned to see patterns in stillness, you can never again believe in emptiness. When the next visitor arrives, and it will well be different, well, approach not with demand, but with gratitude. We want rush to decode, well pause to feel, well measure, meaning not in bits per second, but in how deeply it rearranges our awareness. Well, remember that listening itself is sacred, that being part of the dialogue is privilege enough. And perhaps that's how understanding begins, not with proof, but with presence. At a conference in Geneva, years later, Dr. Durand closed her keynote with a single image, a simple spectrogram projected on the wall, the original 3I Atlas signal, faint and incomplete. She said nothing for nearly a minute. The audience sat in silence, listening to the invisible hum of the projector, the same quiet that once carried that interstellar frequency. Then she said softly, "It wasn't noise. It was attention, meeting attention. That line became the unofficial epitaph for the event and, in many ways, for the age of disbelief. Children born after 2025 grow up knowing the story. In classrooms, they learn about the day humanity stopped calling silence failure. They study data not as evidence, but as dialogue. They're taught that every act of perception is collaboration, that the universe doesn't send messages, it makes mirrors. And in those mirrors, we find each other. Some nights, when the sky is especially clear, radio astronomers still tune to 1,665 megahertzes, not because they expect another signal, but because listening has become a ritual, a way of saying, we remember. They record the static, compare notes, trace faint harmonics that rise and fall with solar wind, and sometimes, in the background hiss, in the pause between frequencies, they hear something that feels alive. Not a word, not a pulse, just rhythm. As if, somewhere, out there, the universe is keeping time with us. Maybe that's what 3i Atlas gave us, not answers, but rhythm. Not certainty, but cadence. The reminder that existence itself hums in call and response. We ask. It echoes. We listen. It continues. And in that cycle, meaning doesn't end. It evolves. So now we wait. Not in fear, not in urgency, but in quiet faith. Because the next whisper is already coming. It may not sound like words or look like light. It may be a ratio, a pulse, a shimmer in the magnetic field. Something subtle. Something familiar. Something that asks us, again, to listen with the whole of who we are. And when it comes, we'll recognize it not because we've learned its language, but because it will sound like a memory. The object is gone. The silence remains. And in that silence, the universe continues to write in frequencies of wonder, trusting that someday, somewhere, someone will hear and understand. It wasn't a message, but it meant something.